I've always found comfort in solitude. As a park ranger, it's my currency, my sanctuary. In the company of towering pines and tranquil lakes of Whispering Pines National Park, I found peace. A peace often interrupted by the odd family on a picnic or an ambitious hiker, but peace nonetheless. Today was no different. The early morning sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft orange hue through the heavy, dew-soaked foliage. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I could hear the chirping of waking birds, the rustling of leaves under a gentle breeze. There was an elegant harmony to it all, the kind only nature could masterfully orchestrate. It's a humbling symphony I've listened to for the past decade, one I never tire of. My boots crunched against the underbrush as I set out on my daily patrol. The early hours were my favorite, as if the forest and I shared a private conversation before the rest of the world woke up. A rabbit bolted from a nearby bush, bounding away as I approached. A startled deer watched me from a distance, its eyes wide and cautious. The usual suspects. The woods were a living, breathing entity. Each creature, each tree, an essential part of its greater being. I always imagined them to have a life of their own, even the ancient pines standing tall by the oldest hiking trail. I called them the watchmen. There was an old legend that said the trees could whisper to those who listened. I'd always written it off as a fireside tale meant to entertain campers. Today, I almost wished it were true. As I ventured deeper into the park, a sense of unease began to creep in. Something unusual for me. The usual calls of the wild were muffled, and the rustling leaves sounded like whispers filled with caution. The forest seemed different, as if hiding a secret. I couldn't put my finger on it, but decided to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to the lingering chill in the morning air. Rounding a corner of the old creek trail, I stopped in my tracks. In front of me stood an anomaly amidst the undisturbed tranquility. An old, dilapidated cabin that I had never noticed before. It sat at the edge of a clearing, covered in creeping vines and marked with the scars of time. Its mere presence was a dissonance in the symphony I knew by heart. A question in a story I thought I had answers to. My heart pounded in my chest as a new chapter in my life began to unfold. One that would irrevocably change my relationship with Whispering Pines National Park. The solitude that was my sanctuary now echoed with unknown terrors and uncertainties that lay beyond the threshold of the cabin. Despite my trepidation, curiosity tugged at me. I slowly approached the cabin, unaware that this was merely the prologue to a tale of dread, a serenade that would soon turn into an ominous, haunting lullaby. Little did I know that the cabin was a gateway, and beyond it lay a mystery that would challenge my courage, sanity, and the very understanding of the world I thought I knew. As I reached for the cabin door, the first dissonant note in the serene serenade of Whispering Pines was struck. The cabin door creaked open under my touch, revealing a dimly lit, musty interior that smelled of decay and damp wood. Despite the obvious signs of abandonment, there was an uncomfortable sense of someone, or something, still living there. It felt like a wound on the flawless skin of the forest, raw and strange. Stepping inside, I scanned the room. My eyes fell on a single dilapidated chair, a table covered with dust and assorted knickknacks, and a crude bed in the corner. The only source of light was a tiny window, its glass coated in years of dirt and grime. But the real curiosity lay on the walls of the cabin, carved symbols etched deep into the wood, their meanings unknown and ominous. As I looked closer at these markings, a shiver ran down my spine. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, their design simultaneously simple yet intricate, as if created with profound intention. I had no clue what they stood for, but I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling of dread. Just when I was about to leave, a rustling sound erupted from the undergrowth outside. Startled, I spun around and rushed out of the cabin. As I squinted into the twilight, a figure emerged from the tree line. He was an old man, cloaked in ragged clothes and a wild, unkempt beard. His eyes, surprisingly bright under bushy eyebrows, flickered with a peculiar light as they met mine. "Who are you?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Name's Enoch," he replied with a voice that sounded like a whisper carried by the wind. There was something off about him, a strange energy that contrasted the serenity of the forest. "And what are you doing out here?" I questioned, trying to keep my voice steady. "Living," he replied simply. He then turned his gaze toward the cabin, a hint of longing in his eyes. It was then I understood. This cabin was his home. And those markings? Maybe they were his handiwork. A sense of unease washed over me as I looked back at Enoch. His eyes held a far-off look, and in that moment I knew I was dealing with no ordinary forest dweller. Seeing my apprehension, Enoch offered a wry smile, then turned toward the cabin and walked away, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. His demeanor unsettled me, not because it was threatening, but because it was inscrutable. As I watched him disappear into the cabin, the forest seemed to hold its breath. I stood rooted to the spot, a whirlwind of thoughts swirling in my mind. My routine patrol had turned into an encounter with the bizarre, a plunge into the uncanny. Unsettled and curious, I made my way back to my own cabin. The woods seemed darker, the silence deeper, and the peace I used to find in the solitude was replaced by a nagging disquiet. The first discordant notes in the serene serenade of whispering pines had been struck, and the forest would never sound the same to me again. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. In the days that followed my encounter with Enoch, the tranquility of whispering pines became a memory I couldn't shake, the image of the peculiar woodsman and the cabin with the unsettling symbols. Enoch seemed deeply intertwined with the forest, yet disturbingly out of place, like an ancient relic that belonged to another era. A new routine began to take shape in my life. On my patrols, I'd pass by Enoch's cabin, observing from a distance. The local fauna, usually unbothered by my presence, skittered away from the cabin as if they sensed something I couldn't. Enoch hardly ever came out during the day, and when he did, he would wander around aimlessly. Or so it seemed. He'd often stop, touch a tree, speak a few words as if in a conversation, and then move on. One day, I mustered the courage to approach him during one of these walks. As I neared, I saw him tracing one of those peculiar symbols on the bark of an ancient oak. The air seemed to vibrate around him, as if the forest responded to his touch. "Enoch," I called out, my voice echoing in the quiet forest. He turned, his eyes meeting mine. They held an uncanny understanding, an understanding that seemed ancient and deep, as though he held secrets that time itself had forgotten. "Why do you etch these symbols?" I asked, pointing at the tree. "They speak," he responded, his voice a mere whisper. "The forest listens." His cryptic words sent a chill down my spine. I was about to question further, but he simply turned away and resumed his walk, leaving me standing in the chilling silence. His words echoed in my head, amplifying the sense of unease that had started to become my constant companion. There was more to Enoch than met the eye. It was as if he was part of the forest, tied to it by some unseen bond. And yet, there was a tension in his presence, a subtle disturbance that felt like a storm brewing on a clear day. The symbols around his cabin, the way animals reacted to him, his strange affinity with the trees, and now these cryptic words. It all started forming a disconcerting picture. The forest, the cabin, and its peculiar resident, they were all pieces of an enigmatic puzzle, and I had unknowingly become a part of it. Every visit to Enoch's cabin, every encounter with him, was revealing a different facet of the park, a facet that was dark, uncanny, and unexplainable. As a park ranger, I was supposed to safeguard whispering pines, but now I stood on the threshold of a mystery that threatened to shatter the peace I was meant to protect. Sleep became elusive, and my days were consumed by thoughts of Enoch and his connection to the forest. I knew in my gut that this was only the beginning of a journey that would plunge me into a world of the supernatural, a world that existed parallel to mine within the confines of whispering pines. Unknowingly, I had become a player in a game that was older than time, and I was far from understanding the rules. The weeks following my exchange with Enoch were riddled with unease. Whispering Pines, once my refuge, now hosted an invisible specter of dread. The forest, the once comforting orchestra of nature, now seemed to hold a dark undercurrent. Then, one afternoon, an emergency call came through the park's radio. A family had reported their son missing. I rushed to their campsite, a familiar pit of anxiety growing in my stomach. The family was distraught, and amidst their sobs and pleas, I pieced together the story. The boy, hardly a teenager, had wandered off into the woods and hadn't returned. Launching an immediate search, we combed the forest. The sun set, plunging the woods into a shroud of inky darkness, pierced only by our flashlights and the haunting calls of nocturnal creatures. Hours turned into a full day, and then 2. The boy remained missing, and with every passing hour, the situation grew grimmer. On the 3rd day, I found myself in the vicinity of Enoch's cabin. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual chatter of wildlife strangely subdued. It was then that I saw it, a familiar symbol etched into the trunk of a tree, just like the ones at Enoch's cabin. The sight sent a cold shiver down my spine. This symbol was different, more elaborate, and its presence here was not just unusual, it was ominous. A thought flashed through my mind, a horrible suspicion. Could Enoch be involved in the boy's disappearance? As soon as it emerged, I tried to dismiss it. The reclusive, albeit eccentric woodsman didn't strike me as malicious, but the unease lingered, growing with the sight of every etched tree I passed. The disappearance rattled the peace within the park, turning the serene escape into a hotbed of whispered rumors and palpable fear. The once idyllic whispering pines felt darker, its silence heavy with the absence of the missing boy. Fueled by a rising dread, I resolved to confront Enoch. As much as I wanted to dismiss my suspicions, the link between his symbols and the disappearance was hard to ignore. I was a park ranger, a guardian of this natural haven, and if Enoch was a threat to that, I had to uncover the truth. The next morning, with a heavy heart, I headed toward the enigmatic cabin in the woods, the place where this strange chapter of my life had begun. I had no idea how to broach my suspicions or what to expect from Enoch, but I knew I had to try. The forest watched in silence as I neared the cabin, its eerie tranquility now a haunting backdrop to the brewing storm. Steeling myself, I approached the cabin door. Before I could knock, the door creaked open, revealing Enoch standing in the dim light. He stared at me, his eyes reflecting an uncanny calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil building within me. Little did I know, I was walking into a confrontation that would reveal a terrifying truth, turning my world upside down and driving me further into the heart of the unimaginable mystery that Whispering Pines held. Enoch's piercing gaze greeted me as I stepped into the cabin. It was as if he had been expecting me, a chilling thought that amplified my apprehension. I stood awkwardly in the gloomy interior, my mind scrambling to find words. "Enoch," I began, my voice faltering under the weight of my suspicion. "There's a boy missing in the park. We found your symbols near the area he was last seen." Enoch's reaction was startlingly unreadable. He continued to stare at me, his eyes never leaving my face. "And you think I am to blame?" he asked, his voice as calm as a still pond. "I didn't say that," I stammered, taken aback by his directness. "Yet you thought it," he interjected, the slightest hint of a smile playing on his lips. Before I could reply, Enoch turned his back to me and walked to the far end of the cabin. He picked up an old, worn-out book and handed it to me. The leather-bound book felt heavy, its pages filled with the same symbols that adorned the cabin walls. "Read," he said simply. With a heavy heart, I opened the book. My heart pounded in my chest as I flipped through the pages, the cryptic symbols looming ominously from the aged parchment. I looked up at Enoch, confusion written all over my face. "I can't understand these," I admitted, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. Enoch took a step toward me, his eyes boring into mine. "The boy is not lost," he said cryptically. "He's been chosen." "Chosen?" I echoed, a chill running down my spine. He nodded, his gaze intense. "By the forest. Every few generations, it chooses someone. For what purpose, I cannot say. It's an ancient pact, a balance that needs to be maintained." His words hung in the air like a terrifying prophecy. The connection between Enoch, the symbols, and the disappearances began to make terrifying sense. My initial suspicion of Enoch was replaced by a horrifying realization. The forest, the serene haven I had loved and protected, was not just a simple haven. It was a living, breathing entity with an inexplicable primal ritual. In the haunting silence that followed, I found myself grappling with this revelation. The missing boy, the strange symbols, Enoch's peculiar behavior. They were all part of a sinister narrative that had remained hidden in the depths of Whispering Pines. Enoch's revelation was a frightening twist in my quest for answers, plunging me further into the realm of the unknown. A heavy sense of foreboding settled within me as I left the cabin. The peaceful chirping of the forest birds now sounded like a chilling chorus. As I trudged back to my post, I couldn't shake off the dread that this was only the beginning, that the forest held more terrifying secrets in its silent, brooding depths. My role as a park ranger had taken an unexpected turn, transforming into a dreadful pursuit of understanding an ancient supernatural pact. The tranquility of Whispering Pines had been shattered, replaced with a spectral echo of fear that seemed to whisper with the wind. In the days that followed, the truth of Enoch's revelation weighed heavily upon me. I found myself staring at the forest, seeing it not just as a peaceful sanctuary, but as an enigmatic, living entity with a terrifying agenda. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I found myself at the doorstep of the Whispering Pines Historical Society. Its musty, dimly lit rooms were filled with old town records, artifacts, and yellowed photographs. If there was any truth to Enoch's words, some record or mention of past disappearances must exist in this archive. Hours turned into days as I sifted through ancient documents, searching for anything that could shed light on Enoch's chilling claims. I was just about to give up when I stumbled upon a series of newspaper clippings from the early 19th century. Each told a similar story: unexplained disappearances of young individuals in the park, their fates remaining a mystery. An icy chill gripped me as I connected the dots. The stories dated back hundreds of years, each disappearance occurring every few decades, just as Enoch had mentioned. Even more terrifying were the faded sketches accompanying some reports. They portrayed symbols eerily similar to the ones Enoch had etched on the trees and cabin walls. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized that these weren't just markings. They were warnings. The Historical Society fell silent around me, its quiet a haunting echo of the terror that filled my heart. My mind reeled with the implications of what I had discovered. A cycle of disappearances spanning centuries, all linked by Enoch's symbols. Returning to the park, I found myself looking at the serene woods with newfound horror. Each rustle of the leaves, every whisper of the wind seemed ominous. The joy and peace that the forest had once held for me were now replaced with a gnawing fear. I was caught in a terrifying reality that was as unbelievable as it was undeniable. The tranquil Whispering Pines was the host to a sinister pattern, a dark ritual that preyed on unsuspecting souls. As I grappled with this knowledge, a sense of grim determination filled me. The park and its people were my responsibility. I had to find a way to break this cycle, to save the missing boy, to protect future visitors from the forest's eerie ritual. With each passing day, I felt myself being pulled deeper into the mystery. Enoch's cabin, once a strange curiosity, now stood as a gateway to understanding the forest's terrifying secret. I knew what I had to do: confront Enoch again. Learn more about the symbols, the ritual, the chosen ones. As I made my way toward the cabin, the forest seemed to watch me, its shadows stretching long and dark across my path. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, the peace of the forest disrupted by the disturbing truth lurking in its depths. As the cabin came into sight, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. Little did I know, the revelations were far from over, and my journey into the heart of Whispering Pines' haunting secret was only just beginning. Standing in front of Enoch's cabin, I felt a wave of apprehension. The forest seemed to breathe around me, its eeriness amplified by my newfound knowledge. The symbols etched around the cabin door seemed to mock me with their silence, their cryptic language a constant reminder of the dark mystery I was entangled in. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. The door creaked open, revealing Enoch's scrutinizing gaze. His eyes bore into me, almost as if he could see the tumult of emotions swirling within me. "I found them, Enoch," I began, my voice filled with a sense of urgency. "The disappearances, the symbols in the archives, it's all true, isn't it?" Enoch's silence was answer enough. "I need to understand," I pleaded. "The chosen ones, what happens to them? Can it be stopped?" Enoch sighed, his age seeming to weigh upon him more than ever. He motioned for me to sit, a seriousness cloaking his usually unreadable expression. "Understanding requires listening," he started. "Listening not to the forest's whispers, but to its silence." His cryptic words hung in the air as he led me toward a worn-out map of the park hanging on the cabin wall. The map was old, its lines faded, and marked with the same symbols I had become far too familiar with. "The chosen ones," Enoch began, his voice a mere whisper, "are not victims, but keepers." "Keepers?" I echoed, confusion gripping me. "Yes, they are chosen by the forest to maintain a balance," he continued, tracing a symbol on the map. "They communicate with the forest, speak its language, keep its secrets. Their disappearance is not a loss, but a transition." His words spun around me, creating a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. I thought about the missing boy, his terrified parents, and my duty as a park ranger to protect the visitors. "But why then?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Why can't it be someone like you?" Enoch's gaze met mine, a profound sadness in his eyes. "It could have been," he confessed. "Once upon a time I was chosen, but I resisted, and ever since, the forest chooses another, every few generations." His confession struck me like a thunderbolt. Enoch, the mysterious hermit, was not just a bystander, but a part of the forest's eerie cycle. The cabin, his symbols, his understanding of the forest, they were all remnants of his selection and refusal. This revelation stirred a potent mix of fear, compassion, and resolve within me. If Enoch could resist, maybe the cycle could be broken. The chosen one saved. As the protector of the park, I felt compelled to try. Taking a deep breath, I looked at Enoch, my determination reflected in my eyes. "Teach me," I implored. "Teach me the language of the forest." Enoch studied me for a moment, the weight of centuries reflected in his gaze. Then he nodded, a silent agreement that set me on a path I could never have imagined. A journey into the depths of Whispering Pine's ancient, silent language. A journey to possibly save the chosen ones. The days following Enoch's agreement were filled with intense learning. The old hermit proved to be a rigorous teacher, revealing to me the mysteries of the forest language. Each symbol I discovered was not merely an etching, but a word, a sentence, a story. My mornings began with studying the symbols, learning their shapes, their meanings. Enoch explained each one, his voice steady as he shared tales and histories that these symbols had conveyed through centuries. In the afternoons, we would venture into the forest, Enoch guiding me to the trees marked with symbols. I learned to understand the forest's whispers, its silences, its sighs. I felt the forest responding to my presence, its ancient spirit acknowledging my efforts. One symbol, however, Enoch held back, the symbol related to the chosen ones. He promised to teach it to me only when he deemed me ready. As days turned into weeks, I found myself growing closer to the forest than ever before. I could feel its pulse, its ebbs and flows. The wind no longer sounded alien. Instead, it hummed familiar tunes. Each rustle of leaves became a whispered secret, each creak of branches, a coded message. However, amidst this newfound connection, my primary goal never wavered. I had to find a way to save the chosen ones. With each passing day, my resolve hardened, my determination fueled by the understanding of the forest and its ancient pact. One day, after weeks of rigorous training, Enoch finally revealed the symbol associated with the chosen ones. He traced it on the ground, his fingers steady, his expression solemn. It was the most complex symbol I had seen so far, a twisted, convoluted mass of lines and curves. Enoch explained its intricate design, its multiple layers. He spoke of the chosen ones, their role as keepers, their fate within the forest's embrace. Listening to his explanation, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. This was the symbol linked to the disappeared boy, the one whose fate had pulled me into this surreal journey. I realized then that understanding this symbol was only the beginning. The real challenge lay in finding a way to interact with it, to negotiate with the forest. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in understanding the symbol, practicing it, engraving it in my mind. I felt its weight, its significance. It was a potent mix of fear and responsibility. Through this, my connection with Enoch grew stronger. He was no longer just a hermit, but my mentor, a guide through this complex labyrinth of ancient language and timeless rituals. Despite the gravity of my quest, there were moments of tranquility. Moments when I would stop and gaze at the vast expanse of whispering pines, its beauty now intertwined with a sense of foreboding and wonder. As the days rolled on, I prepared myself for what was to come. A confrontation with the forest, a plea for the chosen one, a clash between duty and ancient rights. The tranquil woods were not just a sanctuary anymore. They were an adversary, a mystery, a mentor. I was ready to delve deeper, to change the course of an ancient pact, or at least try. The day of confrontation finally arrived. I stood at the edge of the forest, the symbol of the chosen ones etched into my mind, my resolve burning brighter than ever. I looked at Enoch, his aged face unreadable, yet his eyes were filled with a mix of anticipation and concern. He had taught me all he knew, guiding me through the forest's complex language. Now it was my time to put it all to use. Bidding him a silent farewell, I stepped into the embrace of the woods. The familiar rustle of leaves greeted me. The once soothing whispers of the wind now felt like a challenge, a silent dare from the ancient entity I was about to confront. Guided by Enoch's instructions, I headed to the heart of the forest. The deeper I went, the stronger I felt the presence of the woods. It was as if it were aware of my intent, its silence reverberating with unspoken anticipation. As I reached the heart of the forest, I found the tree, ancient and imposing, marked with the symbol of the chosen ones. A feeling of dread and awe washed over me as I traced my fingers over the symbol. Summoning my courage, I began to communicate using the forest's language. I traced the symbols in the air, each stroke a plea, each curve a negotiation. The symbols hung in the air like silent prayers, vibrating with my desperate intent. As I communicated, the forest responded. The wind whipped around me, the leaves rustling in fervor. I felt a strange energy pulsating from the tree, a powerful force acknowledging my plea. With each passing moment, my request grew more urgent, my symbols more elaborate. I was a ranger pleading for a life, a student using the language of the ancient woods to alter its course. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes. Time seemed to blur in the throes of the forest's silent conversation. As I traced the final curve of my plea, a profound silence descended. Exhausted, I fell to my knees, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence was deafening, echoing my desperation and fear. Then, in the depth of the silence, I heard it. A whisper, a sigh, a rustle. The symbol of the chosen ones etched on the ancient tree began to glow faintly. I watched in awe as the convoluted symbol started shifting, its lines moving, its curves bending. It was changing, responding to my plea. The forest had heard me. In that moment, I felt a rush of hope, fear, and exhilaration. The forest, with its ancient rites and mysterious ways, had listened to my plea. But whether it agreed, I couldn't say. As I made my way back to Enoch, the forest seemed different. Not a sanctuary, not an adversary, but an ancient entity capable of listening and perhaps changing. The eerie silence of the woods was no longer intimidating. It was filled with an unspoken promise, a cryptic response to my plea. Whether I had changed the fate of the chosen ones or not, only time would tell. As the ranger of Whispering Pines, I had done my duty. Now, all that remained was to wait and hope. Returning from the heart of the forest, I felt a strange calm envelop me. It was as if a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Despite the uncertainty and the exhaustion, I felt a spark of hope. As I neared Enoch's cabin, I saw him waiting anxiously at the door. His gaze searched my face, looking for answers, for signs. I merely nodded, my expression stoic, my thoughts still swirling in the forest's silent response. In the following days, a tense quietude fell over Whispering Pines. The forest seemed to hum in anticipation, its usual serene whispering replaced with a resonating silence. It was as if time had slowed down, each second stretching into eternity as we waited for a sign, a change, a miracle. I kept myself busy patrolling the park, reassuring worried visitors, maintaining a semblance of normalcy while my mind buzzed with constant questions. Each day ended with a visit to Enoch's cabin, a ritual of shared silence and unspoken hope. It was during one such visit, after a fortnight since my confrontation with the forest, that something extraordinary happened. As we sat in silence, a rustle outside the cabin caught our attention. Emerging from the thick foliage was the missing boy, dazed and confused, but alive. His reappearance brought a wave of shock, relief, and awe. I watched as Enoch's eyes widened in surprise, the hermit taken aback by this impossible occurrence. After centuries of observing the unchanging cycle, seeing the boy alive and back from the forest was a twist in the tale he hadn't expected. News of the boy's return spread like wildfire through the town, turning Whispering Pines into a flurry of excitement and relief. His parents wept in joy, their lost hope rekindled, their prayers answered. In the midst of the commotion, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest, my gaze locked on the heart of the woods. It had listened. It had considered. It had altered its course. The boy's return brought joy and relief, but it also brought questions. What had he experienced? Did he remember anything? Was he a keeper now, or just a boy who had gotten lost in the woods? As much as I wanted to delve into these questions, I knew better. He needed rest, peace, a chance to return to normalcy. As days turned into weeks, life in Whispering Pines resumed its steady pace. The park was filled with the sound of laughter and chatter. The forest's eerie silence was replaced with its tranquil whispering. Despite this, the experience had changed something within me. The forest was no longer just a part of my job. It was an entity I had communicated with, negotiated with. Enoch was no longer just a hermit. He was a mentor, a guide into the forest's enigmatic world. The park was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a site of an ancient ritual, a place of mystery and wonder. With these revelations, I continued my journey as the park ranger of Whispering Pines, my role now imbued with a deeper understanding, a profound connection, and a tale that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Days after his return, the boy started talking about his experience. His words were hazy, filled with fragmented memories and obscure images. Yet between his broken sentences and confused expressions, a pattern emerged. A pattern too eerily similar to the tales Enoch had shared with me. The boy spoke of the forest's embrace, of walking on a path that seemed to appear from nowhere. He mentioned a light that guided him deeper into the woods, a silent whisper that kept him company. He described an enormous ancient tree marked with symbols, the forest's heart, pulsing with strange energy. Each word he spoke echoed the forest's ancient language, the ritual of the chosen ones. The boy may not have realized it, but he was recounting his transition as a keeper. The forest had chosen him, had started the transition, but then it had let him go. His return had given me hope, his tale, a sense of accomplishment. I had reached out to the forest, and it had responded. The cycle could be broken, or at least paused, and I had played a part in it. One day, I decided to show the boy some symbols, the ones I had learned from Enoch. As he looked at them, his eyes widened, a glimmer of recognition flashing across his face. These were there. On the tree, he stammered, pointing at the symbol of the chosen ones. The confirmation was a bittersweet realization. He had seen the symbol, been part of the ancient ritual, but he had been released, allowed to return to his normal life. It was a moment of victory and a moment of understanding. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to the forest, not as a ranger, but as a mediator, a communicator. I listened to its whispers, respected its silence, and in return, it unveiled more of its secrets. It was a silent pact, a bond nurtured by understanding and respect. The boy slowly returned to his normal life, his memories of the forest fading into fragmented dreams. Yet a change in him was visible, a certain calmness, a strange connection with the woods. He was not a keeper, but he was not just a boy who had lost his way either. As for Enoch, he continued his solitary life. However, a sense of contentment had replaced his brooding demeanor. He had witnessed the impossible, seen a shift in an unchanging cycle. And despite his years of solitude and cynicism, he had been a part of that change. My journey as a park ranger of Whispering Pines took a new turn. A turn filled with enigmatic whispers, silent conversations, and a profound connection with the forest and its ancient rites. I was not just a protector of the park anymore. I was a keeper of its secrets, a learner of its ancient language. And as for the forest, it was not just a part of the park. It was an entity, a silent spectator, a mysterious mentor. Together, we continued our silent pact, our journey toward understanding and coexistence. Whispering Pines was no longer just a park for me. It had become a part of my identity, a part of my existence. The forest, with its ancient secrets and silent whispers, was now a part of my soul. In the months that followed, life found its rhythm. The boy resumed his regular life, his memories of the forest dwindling into dreamlike fragments. He visited the park frequently, his bond with the forest more profound than any other visitor. He was a living testament to the forest's change, to its break from the ancient cycle. Enoch, on the other hand, continued his life of solitude. However, his interaction with the outside world increased. He often visited the park, engaging with visitors, sharing tales of the forest. His tales now imbued with a note of hope. He became a storyteller, the keeper of the forest's lore, his stories echoing the ancient whispers of the woods. As for me, my role as the park ranger transformed into something more significant, more intimate. I became the bridge between the forest and the people, an interpreter of its silent language, a protector of its ancient secrets. My days were spent patrolling the park, ensuring its protection, while my evenings were devoted to the forest, deciphering its whispers, understanding its symbols. One day, as I walked toward the heart of the forest, I felt a shift in the air, a familiar rustle of leaves. The silence of the woods was not eerie anymore. It was comforting, welcoming. Reaching the ancient tree, I traced the symbol of the chosen ones. It was no longer a symbol of dread, but a symbol of hope, a testament to the forest's change, to its ability to adapt. Standing there, amidst the towering trees and rustling leaves, I realized my life had come full circle. I was no longer the apprehensive ranger who had stepped into Whispering Pines a year ago. I was a part of the forest, a part of its unending cycle of life, a part of its ancient lore. My journey had been a series of unexpected revelations, surreal encounters, and profound learnings. I had entered the park as a ranger, but emerged as a mediator, a learner of an ancient language, a friend of the forest. And while the forest remained an enigmatic entity, it was no longer a mystery I wished to solve. It was a mystery I cherished, a mystery I respected. As I continued my life in Whispering Pines, I realized the park and its ancient forest were not just parts of my job. They were a part of me. My existence intertwined with their whispers and silences. Each rustle of leaves carried a tale. Each silent breeze, a secret. Each marked tree, a symbol binding me closer to the woods, to its enigmatic essence. As I walked back from the forest that day, I knew I was not just leaving the heart of the forest. I was carrying it with me. Whispering Pines was not just a park. It was a home, a sanctuary, a mentor. And as its park ranger, I was not just its protector. I was its voice, its student, its friend. And so, in the silent language of the forest, my journey continued. My story entwined with the ancient whispers of Whispering Pines. In the end, I was not just the park ranger. I was a part of the forest's tale, a character in its endless story, a chosen one in my own right. I've been a cop in this small town for about 15 years now. It's a quiet place, tucked between rolling hills and dense woods. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where people leave their doors unlocked at night, and where nothing ever seems to happen. At least, that's what most folks think. But I've seen things that no one talks about, things that don't make sense. Most of the time, I just keep my mouth shut. People around here don't like hearing about what's really lurking in the dark, and I can't blame them. But some nights, like tonight, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It all started about 5 years ago. I was working the night shift, patrolling the outskirts of town. It was one of those cold, misty nights where the fog clings to the ground, making everything look like a ghost town. I was driving down an old back road when I saw it, a figure darting across the road in the beam of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, but by the time I skidded to a stop, the thing was gone. I say thing because it wasn't a person. It was too fast, too low to the ground. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or a coyote, but the way it moved wasn't right. It was unnatural. I got out of the car, shining my flashlight into the trees, but all I could see was the fog swallowing the light. That night, I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd just seen a shadow, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there, something watching me from the trees. A few weeks later, a call came in from one of the farms on the edge of town. A couple of cows had been killed. Mauled, actually. The farmer said it looked like a bear attack, but there haven't been bears in this part of Kentucky for as long as I've been alive. When I got to the scene, I almost threw up. The cows were ripped apart like something had torn into them with claws the size of butcher knives. I've seen animal attacks before, but this was different. There were no tracks, no signs of anything that could have done that kind of damage. We filed the report as a wild animal attack and told the farmer to keep his livestock locked up at night, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Over the next few months, more reports started coming in. Livestock disappearing, pets going missing, strange sounds in the woods at night. People were on edge, but no one wanted to admit that something was wrong. This town is built on denial, on pretending everything's fine, even when it isn't. Then one night, I got a call from Old Man Jenkins. Now, Jenkins is a bit of a town legend, a recluse who lives way out in the woods, never really bothering anyone. He doesn't call for help unless he absolutely has to. So when I got the call, I knew something serious had gone down. I drove out to his place, my gut churning the whole way. The road leading up to his cabin was overgrown, barely more than a dirt path. And by the time I got there, the fog was so thick I could barely see. Jenkins was waiting for me on his porch, shotgun in hand, pale as a ghost. "It's out there," he whispered as I got out of the car. "It's been watching me." I tried to get more out of him, but he wouldn't say much, just that something had been stalking his cabin for the past few nights. He'd seen it out of the corner of his eye, darting between the trees, circling his place, waiting. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it wasn't any animal he'd ever seen. We stayed out there for a couple of hours, watching the tree line. Every now and then, I'd hear something, a branch snapping, the rustle of leaves, but I didn't see anything. Just as I was about to tell Jenkins we should call it a night, I saw it. It was fast, just a blur of movement at the edge of the woods, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I couldn't make out much, but it was tall, taller than any human, with long, spindly limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness. Jenkins fired off a shot, but whatever it was didn't even flinch. It just disappeared into the fog, leaving us standing there, hearts pounding, breath catching in our throats. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jenkins. The sightings kept happening after that, more frequent, more intense. People started whispering about the creatures in the woods, but no one wanted to admit it was real. Not out loud, anyway. One night, I was driving home from another late shift when I saw something in the middle of the road. It was standing there, tall and thin, with those same glowing eyes. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest, and for a moment, it just stared at me, like it was trying to decide whether or not to come closer. And then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished into the woods. I've tried to explain it away, believe me, but I can't. There's something out here in these hills, something that doesn't belong. People go missing sometimes, and we always blame it on accidents or wild animals. But I know the truth. I've seen them. So if you ever find yourself in the backwoods of Kentucky, do yourself a favor. Stay inside after dark. Don't go wandering off into the trees. And if you hear something rustling in the woods, don't go looking for it. Because out here, there are things in the dark. And they're watching. They're always watching. About a year ago, I moved my family and me to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end. So please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, then looked up at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there wasn't a peep. It was dead silent. Still, I shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around, but saw nothing. After I reached into my car for what I had forgotten earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving toward me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me, ones that line the walkway to our front door, rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun, called out, and said, "Whoever this is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe it was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned toward my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me note back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leapt up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something. And as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet it sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside the house. At this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. It was around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing it is. Me, growing up in Oregon, I loved the rain. And for the past 10 years, we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year's worth of rain in one day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching it. So for us, this was an enjoyable experience. Except this night, in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stopped me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No." "What did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me, offended that I didn't hear it, and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house, sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stood up and said, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now, at this point, if you knew my wife, you'd know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I've been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I was getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character. Not to mention, she was 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then said, "What if there is some child out there lost in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house, which is lit up like a Christmas tree, is nil." She said, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stood up and started walking toward the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house." I didn't know what was going on, but I told her she needed to go inside. She complied, and we both went inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road toward the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She looked out into the woods and said, "See? There it is again." Again, I couldn't hear anything. But what I did notice was that it was completely silent again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim. You need to get back in the house. She said, "What if someone left a baby out there?" I said, "Well, if that were true, I would hear it too." Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out front on the porch. It was early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn that day. Our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now, he knows he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road about 50 feet behind our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on the water. As we were talking, we were both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drove by and stopped to say hi for a second. The interaction took maybe 8 seconds, as all they said was, "How are things?" We said, "Good," and he told us he'd stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers. We said, "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over to where our son had been, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I told him he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house, or else, but he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in that direction and just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods. But I just wrote this off as him being curious. Most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down and heard a loud bang on the side of our house, on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet above ground level, as we have a full-size cinder block basement. I put on my slippers, grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns, and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, So I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. Nothing. I walked around the house, shining the light intently. As I approached the backside of the house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up into the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs who were in their area weren't making a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter. They bark at everyone, including me. So to see them all hiding, tails between their legs and dead silent, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. I walked back inside and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said, "Okay, as long as the dogs are okay." Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in to sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there is nothing outside. There have also been times when we were sitting in the house, and while I was watching a movie, my wife walked over and asked, "Did you call me?" I said no. She swore she had heard me call her name, right in her ear. She said it was definitely my voice, but I was about 20 feet away in my recliner. The important part, she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground like a balcony with no stairs. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she said she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out what it said. I kept thinking she was going crazy. But as you'll see, I think all of this ties into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop, on the opposite side of our property near the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need. The range is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards. When you're downrange, you're surrounded by woods on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say, it always feels creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you're down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day, around 5 p.m., I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up but fading. I knew this would be my last test. Until then, nothing had really happened during my trips downrange, other than this constant feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this overwhelming feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side. It sounded like a large branch snapping. Now, if you've been in the Tennessee woods, you know branches fall off trees all the time. But this one sounded fresh, like strong, live wood, if that makes sense. I turned and looked, nothing. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, again, nothing. As I started walking again, I heard a deep growl. It was really deep and loud. Worse yet, it felt like it was all around me. I turned to face the range and started walking backward. The thought of a wild dog charging me freaked me out, so running didn't seem like a good idea. I slowly backed up the hill to my rifle. Nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag, grabbed my rifle bag, and quickly walked back to the house. I never told my wife. I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year. My niece was staying with us as a live-in nanny during summer break from college. We were coming back from the store and about a mile from the house when I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights from a wide tree on the side of the road. It caught my attention. They were higher than a deer's, but a different color and size. Just as I said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I commented that it was almost like it knew I could see it and moved. The color was golden or green, and it moved like a large cat, ominous, hard to explain. I shrugged it off as we passed the tree and saw nothing. A few minutes later, we arrived home. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came running out to greet me. As I waited to help carry bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was focused, my neighbor's property across the street. Now what I saw has kept me up at night. Up until this point, I was skeptical. Even after what happened the year before, I still thought maybe it was just my imagination. My street is in a spread-out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of the road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house is adjacent to mine on about an acre. Directly in front of us is a wall of woods, and behind us is thousands of acres of untouched forest. As I looked across to my neighbors, I saw a large dark figure between the trees. It moved quickly on all fours, then stood up and walked like a man. It was tall, but what was strange was the distance it was covering. When it passed in front of the shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but faster than any human sprint. And more importantly, no sound. It was like it phased in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized it was looking at us. It had moved at an angle to minimize its exposure and was moving fast and silently. The hairs on my neck stood up. Whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get inside. I grabbed my son and ran in. I came back out with my AR-15 and a short scope. My niece was still out grabbing stuff from the car. I was annoyed. I'd told her clearly to go inside, but I said nothing and just watched. She turned toward the woods and suddenly bolted to the house, panicked. I asked what she saw, her face pale. She said, "I heard something big walking in the woods, and then a deep guttural growl." I asked why she didn't come when I told her. She said she thought I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen. She wanted to go get a closer look. I told her not to, but she went anyway. As she walked down the walkway, I heard leaves crunching in the woods. I told her to stop and take the flashlight. She was about 6 feet from the SUV. As she turned and walked back, I saw something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV and across the street into the woods. Our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. Whatever it was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single leap. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It had been hiding behind the car, out of sight, waiting. She still doubted me and walked back with the flashlight. As she entered the driveway, she stopped, leaned forward like she saw something. I asked what it was. She ran back onto the porch, repeating, "Nope, nope, nope." She said there was a figure hiding inside a tree, and she saw its eyes. I asked what they looked like. She said at first they were dull red, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I asked, "What do you mean dead?" She said the pupils looked gray, like blind eyes, almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down, but as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and ominous as hell. The next morning, we compared its height to the tree limb. It was around 9 feet tall. The eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After researching, I think it might have been a glimmerman or a crawler. I checked for sightings in Benton County, but found nothing. More importantly, it seemed to phase in and out, like a shadow person, but bigger, more obvious. I originally posted this on r/Bigfoot, but after more research, I believe it belongs here. One thing that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing things no one else could. It also mimics playback communication. So when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs that I had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fallen and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to recently. And it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped, owned land, and on one of the trees there's this large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property, and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and is just pure forest as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there is more than one of these things out there, this really makes the missing form one make a whole lot of sense. I feel perplexed and scared, as what can I do? Any advice? I will try and keep this post alive with any new experiences. I have reason to believe a rancher in the northwest of my state might have come under a Wendigo attack. I'm on the trail of the case as a paranormal investigator, and I realized I know very little about Wendigos, besides having seen 2 outside my home a few years back. 40 cows were killed but not consumed, with bites consistent with that of a large canine. I'm almost 80% sure it was a skinwalker rather than a Wendigo, but a friend of mine asked if there's any chance it could be a Wendigo, so I wanted to give it the right amount of thought before discarding the theory. Since Wendigos are characterized by all-consuming hunger, I'm inclined to say it wasn't one. I'm truly convinced it was a skinwalker, but I figured I'd gather a second opinion or 3. Also, if there's anything I'm missing, let me know. Any other possible options? I live in the western USA, and I've already ruled out Sasquatches. I don't have enough information to confirm the existence of genuine lycanthropes, but that would be a solid guess if I could be sure they were real. This was about 23 years ago, and I had no clue what a dogman was, and I didn't believe in anything supernatural back then. I was hunting wild hogs in one of the southernmost areas of the Great Dismal Swamp. This is far south of the wildlife refuge where it ends at the Albemarle Sound in eastern North Carolina. I had put my boat in the water at a friend's house, about a half hour by water from where I went into the swamp. This was in late November, so it was pretty cold and really overcast, and it gets dark around 5 or so. It was about noon when I tied up and got out of the boat. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. I was working my way inland. Some of this part of the swamp can be walked through when the tide is low, and it's just marshy with deeper canals and bogs scattered about. But there aren't any trails or marked paths or anything, so you really have to pay attention to where you're going, and definitely need a compass since you can't see the sun. It's pretty dark in there, even on bright and sunny days. I was back in there about 2 hours, looking for signs of hogs. I could tell some had been back there at some point, but it had been a while. I got a little further in and started smelling what I had thought was a boar. It's breeding season, and male wild hogs have a very distinct smell. It's musky and kind of fermented, mixed with old poop and urine. Kind of hard to explain if you've never smelled it before. However, this was different. It was musky, but more like an outside dog that's soaking wet. I stopped to look and listen. And after 10 or so minutes, I started hearing a snuffling breathing that came and went. After a bit, I started to hear some growling. I started to get a little freaked out because it didn't sound like a hog, and it sounded big. I stopped again and knelt down, waiting and looking around. Where I was at, the brush was pretty thick, so I really couldn't see more than 20 or so feet in any direction. That's when I started seeing movement. It definitely wasn't moving like a hog. It was kind of low, walking crouched down, but not on all fours, and I was only getting glimpses of it, and it would stop. It was probably about 40 feet away. This is when I actually started getting scared. I was born in northeastern Kentucky and spent most of my free time as a kid in the woods, camping, riding dirt bikes, and have always been comfortable even in the deep woods. So when I moved to NC, I fell in love with the swamp. This is the first time I think I had ever felt real, actual fear. I had a Mossberg 590 shotgun, but no extra shells and no pistol. The 590 also has a bayonet lug, so I took out the bayonet and put it on. I started backing up, not taking my eyes off where I had last seen whatever it was. A few minutes later, I hear it again, a little further over to my left. I'm probably about 3/4 of a mile into the swamp. It doesn't seem very far, but the terrain doesn't make for really quick movement. This goes on for about another 20 minutes while backtracking out as fast as I can, and I'm still hearing it and catching glimpses of movement, and the smell is getting stronger. After a bit, I realize that this thing has gotten between me and the way I came in from my boat, and I'm starting to panic. I try to start getting further away from it and headed in the right direction. And then I see it again, and it's standing up, and it's pretty damn tall. It was still back in the brush, so I couldn't really make out any details as it's dark as hell back there. I wanted to cry and run, but I knew that was a bad idea. It didn't seem like it wanted to get in the water, so I started wading through the canal headed back towards my boat. I started to put some distance between it and myself, so I got back on hard ground to move a little faster, but I can still hear it snuffling and growling and moving through the brush, but it's not close anymore. I made it back to my boat, and I'm soaking wet and freezing. But I thank God I made it out of there, and just in time as it's getting foggy and starting to drizzle. I had never been that scared in my life. I made it back to my buddy's house and told him what happened, and I can tell he knows something when I tell him where I went. He brings me in and gives me some hot coffee with a big slug of bourbon in it. When I calm down, he takes me to the other house out back of his property to where his granddad lives. I had met his granddad before, but he had always been kind of standoffish to me. I found out later he just had real bad PTSD from Korea, and he, my buddy, and his family had lived in that area since after the Civil War. I think his granddad's great-granddad had been a slave around there, but that's a story for another day. I guess what I mean to say is his family had history in that area and knew the place a lot better than me. After I told his granddad what happened, he stood up, looked me in the eye, and said, "Don't go back in there. You're lucky you made it out. That's where the big dogs live." I left and went home and slept for about 18 hours. I tried to forget about that experience and started to believe I was just seeing things and freaked myself out. I eventually forgot all about it until a few years ago when a dogman encounters video came up in my YouTube feed. I was curious what the hell a dogman was, so I started listening to it, and that whole experience came flooding back to mind. It was very similar to what happened to me. I started looking into it, and there have been other sightings and encounters in eastern North Carolina. So that's my story. I'm 44 now, and still live in coastal North Carolina, but haven't been back anywhere close to that area. I still hunt and love the outdoors in the swamp, but don't go too far in anymore. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there. My age, we like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teenagers. I walk over there a lot since my best friend lives just a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek and usually only takes me about 25 to 30 minutes. I have made this trip dozens of times now and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge at all. However, there is a patch of forest about midway there that's a little unnerving. Sometimes there is always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I tried to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind was playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams that there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure of what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation, so I whispered, "Hello," hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips. I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there. So I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back and the sound of my own voice echoed, "Hello." I started to breathe too fast, my heart pounding against my chest. I felt like I might faint. "Hello." My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream, I couldn't reply, as my voice echoed over and over from only a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. "Hello," it repeated. "Stop it." I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent for a long minute. Nothing happened. The air only grew stale, and I realized for the first time there were no typical forest sounds, no bugs, no frogs or crickets, nothing. I stood there terrified, waiting to see what could happen next. "Stop it," it mimicked back. I'd had enough and was willing for my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard rustling in the bushes only 20 feet to my left. I watched in horror as a deer head with huge antlers protruded from the bush. And as it came further out and stood upon two legs, I took off. I flew out of those woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mother came in at some point and asked me if everything was all right. I replied yes, that I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I might have just been afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to reply or look out my window. This terrified me even more. He said to call the next morning and he would explain more, that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, I noticed the air changed. The night sounds quieted, and I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers up over my head like a child far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. "Hello," I cried. It was all I could do. "Hello? Stop it!" It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said, but then it did something new. It called my name Amy in my mother's voice. "Amy, Amy, come here!" "Hello, stop it!" My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke around noon to my friend calling to tell me that he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what had happened to me. He said there was a creature called a Yanella Ducci who goes on all fours. He explained that it was an evil entity that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required. It had caught my scent and knew me. Now, I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, and I would always have to be careful. Last night I heard scratching on my window, then a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said in my mother's voice. At one point, it started calling my name, but drawing it out really, like it tried to get me to come inside or open the door and let it in. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is it seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can handle that. I live in Somerset County, Pennsylvania on the mountain ridge and was curious if there have been any reports of any type of activity here this past year. We live in a very rural area, and I've been in this home for 20 years. This past year, it just seems like some strange things have been happening. My teen daughter's bedroom window faces the road. Across the road is a wooded area and farmland, with lots of abandoned mines in this area. I'm sure the area across the road has been mined. My daughter, who is 17, has been complaining since probably the summer of 2023 about strange noises coming from the woods. One night, she woke me, and I heard them as well. The best explanation I could come up with was feral hogs. Even though we never saw what was making these noises and causing the trees to move, the noises were feral and terrifying. We have visits from coyotes, bobcats, fishers, bears, and all kinds of native wildlife, and we hear those types of sounds all the time. This was different. The trees were shaking. My daughter goes out very early for the bus when it's dark and has also claimed to see a deer that disappeared, reappeared, or shapeshifted to the point where she is afraid to wait for the bus. I saw a mountain lion on my property this past summer. I've decided that was just a normal mountain lion, despite the Game Commission's insistence that they don't live here. I know it sounds ridiculous, but things seem strange here lately. Something is just different. There is a creepy feeling I get when I'm outside at times, like I'm being watched, that I've never had before. I've also noticed much more air traffic overhead, to the point that I installed an app on my phone to see what was flying over. I've seen more strange helicopters flying over, where it used to be occasional. I usually brush it off as having something to do with the Flight 93 memorial. On Thursday night, January 18th, 2023, around 6:50 p.m., a helicopter went over so low that it shook my house. I was busy, so it took a couple of minutes of this continuing before I checked the app and noticed it was a Black Hawk helicopter out of Latrobe. It was across the road, over the area where my daughter had been complaining of the noises coming from the woods. It hovered over the area for a good 10 minutes in one spot, then disappeared from the radar altogether. I tried to see it from my upstairs window, but couldn't see much. My husband, who initially thought I was paranoid, also began to think it was strange. We saw lights in the woods over that way, but not much more. We could not see the helicopter in the air. The weather has been generally crappy here with high winds and blowing snow this week. I'm not sure if they landed or turned off the radar, but I'm guessing they may have landed because I could no longer hear the helicopter sounds. I've believed in the paranormal for a long time because I once saw a ghost in the 90s when I lived in Baltimore. I've never really thought much about cryptids or things that could be dangerous. Just wondering if you've heard anyone else reporting odd things in this area. It's not the Chestnut Ridge. I think it's the next ridge over that may run through Bedford and Somerset counties. Just curious if anyone else has said anything this way. This is an encounter my girlfriend and her friend had a few years ago, not mine personally. I've heard her tell this story a few times before, but after recently hearing them together describe what they saw, I thought that you'd find it interesting. Maybe someone has seen something similar. This encounter happened in Lakewood, New Jersey, a few years back. It was midday sometime in September. My girlfriend and her friend used to jog together regularly at local parks. The park they were at this particular day is called Lake Curzalejo, which butts up to a housing development. The trail they were on loops around the lake, and 3/4 of the trail is basically just a normal paved sidewalk that follows a road but eventually turns to dirt and goes through a small wooded area on the far side of the lake, the other quarter of the trail. Mind you, this place is far from being remote. It is New Jersey, after all. While jogging through the wooded part of the trail, they came upon a creepy humanoid-looking figure on the edge of the trail that stopped them both in their tracks. They both kept referring to this thing as troll-like. It was short, maybe 4 feet tall at most. It was dressed in a long black hooded cloak, hunched over, sitting on a wooden chest. Yes, a wooden chest. Exactly the kind you'd imagine a troll to be sitting on. They said they could not see any face at all because its head was directed at the ground and the hood was too long. But what they did notice was the cloak was short enough to see part of its legs, which were wearing what looked like regular flesh-colored stockings and had very small, clubbed feet. Its legs had large, protruding boils or tumor-like lumps on the exposed area. It was wearing blue gloves, too. Terrified, they eventually made their way past this thing, coming only a few feet from it, hoping it wouldn't jump out at them. They got the hell out of there faster than they've ever run before. It didn't say anything or try to cause them any harm. It just sat there hunched over. They thought at first that maybe it was just a mannequin or something someone put there as a joke, but they noticed hand movement right before they passed it. Needless to say, they have never gone back to this lake ever again. Every time my girlfriend talks about this encounter, I can hear the fear in her trembling voice, and she was obviously somewhat traumatized by the encounter. Even though I geek out about these types of stories all the time, she has absolutely zero interest in any of these types of things. She will roll her eyes or shake her head and tell me I'm crazy when I tell her about a cool story of Bigfoot or aliens or whatever that I read about, trying to pique some interest in her in these types of subjects. However, she continues to want nothing of it. I'm a very open-minded person when it comes to this stuff. I can't say I believe in anything because I've never had a convincing encounter aside from hearing a few strange sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. I always ask myself, is it possible creatures, aliens, or Bigfoot exist? The answer is usually yes. But then again, someone just playing a prank to mess with people is extremely more logical sometimes, especially in a place like New Jersey. The Bigfoot I saw in Temecula, California in June 1985 was at night as I stopped on a dirt road. I couldn't drive any farther that night, and when I got out to do my business, I heard and saw it as I was finishing up. It did have an odor of something dead, like the decomposing body of a coyote. Anyway, it stood about 50 yards into a dry riverbed, with trees about 45 feet in average height. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the smell and saw movement. But what may be different than most sightings is its eyes actually glowed bright blue and were about 11 feet tall. Judging by the tree height, its eyes were just above a limb that I measured at 11 feet. The next day, I had a .357 with me, but I had a feeling that it would not stop this creature if I were to shoot it in case it came for me. I left in a big hurry, and that Toyota truck just did not seem fast enough. That was the second time I had seen one. The first was back in March 1952 in the Sage area between Hammett, California, and Temecula, California. I went back the next day and measured the tree limb to its footprints, which were about 20 inches long and maybe 9 inches wide. This was a huge creature. I had a .357 I carried at all times with my own hot loads, a Colt Python with which I was very accurate. But it was so big, I felt it would not stop if he or she came for me. Do or don't take my word. I know that 11 feet is big, but that is what I believe it to be, by the footprints and the tree limb. One difference from other sightings, except for the dead and foul smell, is this one difference. Its eyes glowed a bright blue when a light was flashed in its eyes, and me being 70 yards away, which is fairly close, it is out there somewhere, most likely. This area is close to the Puma Indian Reservation, which goes down towards Mount Palmer Observatory, a whole lot of forestry-type land. I was part of an alternative spring break trip at my university, and we were in a van, and it happened a few years ago. We went from Michigan to Utah and had a day off, and we all decided to hop on our 2 vans and go to Arizona for the Grand Canyon. Well, it was starting to get dark, and it was such a beautiful experience to see. But then, out of the corner of my eye, as I'm driving, I notice in one of those remote desert houses that 2 men were throwing what looked like human-sized bags into a ditch. To this day, I keep thinking they were bodies being thrown into a ditch and buried, or maybe stashing some drugs in the desert. They were too preoccupied to notice the vans and were a good distance from us to possibly notice. But I can't shake the feeling of dread. What would have happened if they saw us or even imagined what could have been in those bags? The lack of light pollution and being in the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan, is pretty great if you like looking at the night sky. Add the light amplification capabilities of night vision goggles to this, and you start seeing some really weird stuff. Probably mostly UAVs or manned jets with a couple of satellites, and the general glitchiness of night vision explains what I was seeing. But all the same, my grandfather was a World War II vet, and one of his war stories was about being hunkered down in a ditch with a bunch of other guys when a French woman came along and went from soldier to soldier, handing them apples. He'd looked away for a minute when she got to the last guy, but when he looked back, she was just gone with no obvious place she could have gone to, and no one else knew where she went either. Probably a perfectly reasonable explanation, but he seemed to think there was something supernatural going on. I was in the Marines. We were in Okinawa for a while the battalion I served with rotated one company to Okinawa for a few months on a cycle, and I was pulling a simple patrol with a couple of other guys. No big deal, just around the restricted areas near the base. One guy radios, "There's this woman walking across the beach," and he can't get her to stop. Another guy comes from the opposite end to try and cut her off. I mean, we didn't want to shoot her or anything. Come on. And they're both approaching her, trying to get her attention, when, at about 50 meters or so away from her, she turned to face the ocean and, according to them, just disappeared. They could be pranking us, but if so, they both must be damn good actors because they seemed shaken as hell by it all. We were also told this is by no means the first time this has happened. I'm an environmental educator at a nature preserve, so I spend a lot of time outdoors in sometimes isolated areas. There's one area of the park I try not to take groups of kids anymore. Once in a while, we have to go through that trail since it's a shortcut to the kayak launch. And when it's 95 degrees Fahrenheit outside, you're ready for anything that'll make your trip shorter. When I started there, one of the first things I did was familiarize myself with all areas of the preserve. So I spent quite a bit of time hiking through all of the trails, even the rarely used ones, since I have to know my way around to navigate groups or go rescue someone if they get lost, which happens. One part of the preserve is an old homestead site of a now abandoned pineapple plantation. It was settled in the 1890s. We don't know much about the family beyond the name and the year they settled there, and the approximate year the homestead was abandoned. This is in southern Florida, and there are thousands of similarly abandoned homestead sites. The early settlers of that area had to be tough as nails. This was a pre-railroad area. The nearest town was about 5 miles south through what would have been wilderness with no real roads. So, these guys were on their own in a land absolutely bursting with mosquitoes, panthers, bears, and bad water. The water table is high, and fresh water can be easily contaminated by the salt water nearby. In other words, early homesteaders were badasses because that was the only way they'd survive. There is a narrow trail through what was once the homestead site. On one of my first days, I decided to trek through there. I got about half a mile in when I started to get some weird vibes. I've always been sensitive to my surroundings and have spent enough time in isolated natural areas to know that if something doesn't feel right, it probably means your instincts are picking up on something you should pay attention to. Usually, this means your brain is picking up on minute movements on the ground that indicate an unfriendly snake may be nearby, or another animal you don't want to confront. While the panthers are nearly gone, we've got aggressive wild boars and bobcats that freely roam. So I stopped dead in my tracks and let my mind go quiet, looking around carefully for any warning signs. There weren't any, and I didn't see any recent tracks, but the bad vibe feeling was still there. I shrugged it off and kept going. The trail kept getting narrower, and the bad vibes kept growing deep in my gut. I felt I was being watched and followed. Now, this is an isolated area, so the possibility that a person was following me was remote but possible. I stopped every few meters, but there were no sounds. Actually, none at all, not even birds. I started to sweat, and my heart started to race. One thought kept echoing in my mind. You are not welcome here. You are not welcome here. Turn around, you are not welcome. Well, fuck that, I thought, just jittery from nervous new job feeling. I came to a bend in the trail, and I stopped. My feet would go no further. In my mind, the phrase got louder and louder. You are not welcome here. You are not welcome here. I heard a crash coming from behind me, but when I turned to investigate, there was no one. Not animal, not human, nothing. The vegetation was sparse enough I would have been able to see something. I turned around and left. I put it down to nerves or me being a wimp or something and sort of forgot about it. About a month later, I'm taking a camp group through to the kayak launch where our kayaks await us. I decided to take the kids through the narrow trail to save us about 10 minutes. We get to the same bend in the trail, and the kids have gone silent. These are 9-year-olds in summer camp. They are not silent. They're never silent. I look behind me to one kid who looks as though he's scared shitless. "I don't like it here," he said. "Why not?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I feel like we shouldn't be here." I couldn't turn around at that point, so we hustled to the kayak launch, and all was well, but we were all a little on edge. I took another group through the trail a week later, and again, the kids were silent at that bend in the trail. For that whole summer, whenever I took the shortcut, kids would get silent, and I'd get those bad vibes. I try not to go down that stretch of trail anymore, if I can help it. Obviously, this is nothing more than a gut feeling on my end, but only a few other times in my life have I felt a gut feeling about a place that strongly. I don't know if it's the spirit of whatever homesteader was there or something else, and it's hard to describe, but it doesn't want people trespassing. As far as I know, it's never hurt anyone, but it seems to make everyone feel the same way. You're not welcome. My father was driving a truck, and at around 3 a.m. in California, he was on a dirt road between cornfields, going faster than he should have been probably, when all of a sudden, some woman appeared on the side of the lane and stood there. It was so last second that he couldn't react, and the right side mirror ended up hitting her in the head. He stopped, couldn't find her, called the police, and made a report. They never found her. Back in the summer of 1997, I had a terrifying experience with what I now know to be the phenomenon known as the black-eyed people. At the time, I had never heard of these beings and have been bothered by the experience for many years. It's only just occurred to me to scour the internet to see if anyone else has ever witnessed anything like it, as I knew that I couldn't possibly be the only one that this has happened to. My encounter differs from any that I have now discovered so far, as they were not trying to communicate with me, but were rather trying to keep away from me. Believe me, I now know that that is a good thing. Also, it differs in the fact that my experience happened in broad daylight rather than late at night like the others I have read. It was a hot, sunny summer day in 1997. I was about 15 at the time and was out with my friends. I live in a small town called Grantham in Lincolnshire, UK. While out with my friends, I was not far from my home and decided to go home to grab a quick drink. My two friends accompanied me down to my house and waited outside while I went in to have a drink of water. I was quite thirsty, so quickly drank 2 pints of water and then went back outside. My friends had gone, so I decided I would walk back to my friend's house, which was around the other side of the block. As I walked up the path to the street, I happened to look about 5 houses down where my mom's friend lived. At the front of her garden, she had a wooden fence at the time and a driveway on the furthest side of the garden. There was also a wooden fence, and just behind it, there were 2 very large conifer trees that overhung the fence. So, looking down the street, I saw 2 people backed up to the fence, and the top of them was pushed back into the overhanging conifers. So, I only saw the 2 pairs of legs. Thinking that these were my friends messing around with me, I started walking down towards them. As I got closer to them, I shouted out, "Come on, you 2, I can see you hiding there." Thinking that they would come out laughing, I smiled to myself. But instead of coming out, they managed to jump up into the conifers over the fence and come out in my mom's friend's garden. At this point, I was thinking how they could have done this because the foliage on the trees was pretty thick. They didn't stop there. They turned around towards the next garden and managed to climb over the 5-foot fence panel. As I watched them weirdly go over the panel, I shouted again to stop messing around. I said that it was weird the way they got over the fence because it wasn't a hop or a jump. I can only describe it as lizard-like. That's the only way that comes to my mind to describe it. So, I kept walking down the road and watched as they went over a 6 feet gate into the next door's back garden. So I thought to myself, I know what to do. I would carry on walking and catch them when they come out of the next garden. I picked up my pace, carried on, and caught sight of them in the next garden, and stopped dead in my tracks as I looked in horror at what I'd been chasing. They stood a few feet away from each other. One looked like a teenager. He was wearing the fashion of the time, which was a blue puffer jacket that was zipped up. He was wearing jogging bottoms that had studs up the legs, which were called poppers, trainers, and a baseball cap. I didn't look at his face, as the other one caught my attention nearly straight away. This one was much older, very pale skin. The top of his head was completely bald, but around the side of his head, he had long, greasy black hair down to the middle of his back. He was wearing a long trench coat, which went down to his ankles. He was wearing boots. His hands had long fingers that ended with sharp-looking, dirty nails. He had a big hooked nose, and his eyes were pure black. It looked so evil. As my eyes met him, it felt like time stood still. Nothing was moving. Not a leaf, no breeze, nobody else in the street. Silence. I couldn't move, as I was paralyzed with fear and terror. I knew it was staring at me into my eyes, maybe into my soul. I stood rooted to the spot for what felt like hours, but must have been maybe 5 minutes. I broke the eye contact, turned, and ran for what felt like my life back to my house. When I got indoors, I sat down and cried like a big baby. I couldn't console myself. It took me a while to compose myself and tell my parents what had happened. They didn't know what to do. I sat down and drew what I had seen. I still have the drawing today. Not that I need it. That image is well and truly etched into my mind, and I would probably draw the exact same one in another 30 years. I don't know what this thing is. It definitely was not human. Over the years, it has played on my mind, bringing many questions and no answers. I thought it was either an alien, a demon, or any monster in between. Some of the questions it's brought me, apart from what is it, how did they climb the fence like they did? Why were they wearing large coats on a boiling hot day after reading other accounts of them? Why were they out in the middle of the day on a normal street in a small town? Why did they run from me? I hope no one ever has the experience of encountering these black-eyed beings. If you see one, run for it. P.S. It turned out that my friends went straight back home when they left me. I was quite angry with them for a while and told them what had happened, only for them to laugh at me and think I was joking. I've never been more serious about anything. This is no laughing matter, and I dread to think what could have happened if I hadn't run off. Please be aware of them and take care of yourself. This was not hiking, but it was in a remote place in the woods. My uncle built a house on some acreage he has that is pretty far out there. There is not another house within 2 miles of his, at least, and most of that is woods and cow pastures. But his place is beautiful. He built it all by hand and has a wonderful wraparound deck, perfect for family get-togethers. We were all out there, probably 20 adults and 5 or 6 kids, for a party one day. It was one of those summer times when it's blazing hot, but the light breeze is cool enough that you don't notice it after a while. I had been there hanging out all day when I was asked to run into town and grab some more groceries. So I packed up and headed out. I got the groceries and everything was fine. As I drove back, it was starting to get dark, and it was at a time of year when night falls fast. It was pitch black when I finally arrived. As I pulled up, I noticed something sitting in front of my car, facing the house. It wasn't disturbed by my headlights, but it did glance back at me once. It was a panther, just chilling there, watching the party. As I sat there for a second, watching it, I noticed that it had specifically placed itself near the edge where all the kids were running around. After I had my headlights on it for a minute or so, it kind of looked back at me again, as if to say, "Okay, I was caught. Oh well." And then it gave the most human-like sigh and just walked off into the woods. I sat there for a bit before building myself up to get out of my car and go to the party to tell everyone. I've lived in East Tennessee for most of my life. Growing up, I'd hear old wives' tales and urban legends about strange creatures that roamed the forest. For the longest time, I thought what every other kid thought, that they were just stories told to scare kids away from dangerous places so they wouldn't fall into a ravine or get lost in the massive wilderness. I never thought any of it was more than made-up stories. That's not to say I didn't spend my share of time with covers pulled tightly over my head when the wind blew branches against my window, which happened to face the woods. As I grew older, I found myself gravitating toward the stories of strange creatures in the woods. That curiosity is what led me to investigate such things in my spare time. People around here seem to be obsessed with Bigfoot, as if he's some local celebrity. They tend to ignore or downplay other cryptids. I don't know why. With the hundreds of thousands of acres of unexplored and barely explored forest, it seems there's plenty of space for anything that feels like making its home there to be left in relative peace. Me? I'm more of a fan of dogmen, unofficially, of course. You see, once I graduated high school, my only goal was to become a park ranger. Where else could you go to work and be surrounded by such glorious nature, even at its most dangerous? There are literally dozens of stories I could tell, but the one that sticks with me is about the hikers from a couple of years ago. I remember it was early October. I always make the hike up to Clingman's Dome several times during autumn. Gazing out over the canvas of trees sprouting a myriad of colors, looking every bit like nature's fireworks show, reinforced that I had made the right career choice. I was on patrol when a call came in to go to the cabins near Fontana Lake. I got the address and headed south, crossing into North Carolina. When I got there, I was met by a woman who said her husband, son, and brother-in-law had gone to the lake fishing and hadn't come back. I got the information I needed about their general description, names, and a description of the truck and boat, then headed out to search for them. She said they were heading up to Wolf Creek. I called it in and told the station I would be driving down to Flat Branch to see if they had gone into the river there. It was a decent drive to get there, but then it was a decent drive to get pretty much anywhere out in the backwoods of the Smoky Mountains. When I got there, I found 3 trucks parked off to the side. 2 of them had empty boat trailers. I checked the description the wife had given me, and it matched one of the trucks. I had a starting point for my search. I walked up to the water and looked both ways, hoping to luck out and find them coming in from a hard day's fishing. No such luck. There was a house nearby, so I walked over and asked if they had seen my quarry. The man said he had been out fishing himself yesterday and recalled seeing a boat like the one I described with 2 men and a boy in it. I asked him which direction they were going, and he said west. I asked if he had a boat and could take me up to Wolf Creek. The man's demeanor changed from friendly to deadly quiet. He agreed to take me across the river, but not all the way to Wolf Creek. I accepted what I could get. After a quick jog back to my truck to get my backpack, he ferried me across and quickly left. It was a mile or so to the rural campsite I suspected they had camped at. I started walking along the edge of the river, keeping an eye out for them. It wasn't long before I spotted a boat sitting on the shore. I approached the boat, and it seemed to be the right one. Everything about this missing persons report seemed like just another case of someone staying out later than planned. It was a little too easy. I would be very happy to find them sitting by a campfire, about to pack up and go home. It didn't take long to hike to the campsite, but when I got there, things stopped being easy. There were only 2 tents set up, but they both looked like someone or something had torn into them. I checked inside each one and found sleeping bags and general camp equipment strewn about. I did my best not to disturb anything. When I came to the second tent, I found something more disturbing. This tent was also in disarray, but as I looked, I saw distinct drops of red. There was a notebook sitting near one of the sleeping bags. I picked it up and paged through it. October 3rd. We headed out for our annual fishing trip this morning. Mom wasn't too happy, but we told her we'd be back tomorrow. The drive to the boat launch was kind of long, but we filled the time talking about all the fish we were going to catch and generally telling stories about the area. Dad tried to scare me with a story about a cryptid that lives in the area, but I knew he was just yanking my chain. We got to the boat launch and headed out into the water without too much of a hitch. Uncle Roger nearly fell in trying to get the boat undone. He didn't find it nearly as funny as Dad and I did. Once we were out on the lake and had our lines in the water, he seemed to settle in and enjoy himself. After a few beers, he was laughing about it with us. We caught a couple of fish, but they were too small, and we had to throw them back. Dad said he'd heard about a good spot up by Wolf Creek. We had better luck when we got there. Uncle Roger caught 3 largemouth bass, and I caught 2. Dad had a big one on his line, but it got loose before we could net it. It was starting to get dark, so Dad said we should go to one of the rural campsites. We pulled the boat up to shore and tied it to a large tree, then took our gear and hiked to the campsite. There wasn't anyone else there, which Dad said was odd because the site is normally full. We unpacked and set up our tents, and Dad got a fire going while Uncle Roger cleaned the fish. We ate, laughed, and talked until it was dark and we turned in for the evening. Dad said there was a better fishing spot further west, and he wanted to go there early in the morning before we headed back to the cabin. It's the middle of the night, and Dad is playing a joke on me. I woke up for some reason, and he wasn't in the tent. I could hear rustling outside, along with something pawing the ground and snorting. I knew it was Dad trying to scare me. He and Uncle Roger had been telling cryptid stories while we ate supper. I told them they weren't going to scare me like they did last year. They just looked at each other and smiled. I knew they would have something up their sleeves. I didn't bother to turn the light on or go out and check. I knew they would just run away and hide, pretending to be a creature I had scared off. Then, in the morning, they would ask each other if they had heard the commotion, hoping to scare me. I wasn't falling for it. One thing you learn from having a prankster for a dad is not to believe anything you see, or in this case, hear. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but Dad was making it tough. He was stomping and growling around so loudly, trying to get my attention, but I wasn't having it. When I got up in the morning and went outside, the campsite had been destroyed. Uncle Roger asked if I had heard anything last night, and I played along, saying I'd heard some creature outside our tent, but was too scared to go out and check. He made a good show of searching for Dad and seeming genuinely concerned. I was just waiting for Dad to get tired of the game and come back to the campsite. As the morning wore on, Uncle Roger started talking about going to look for him. I wanted to tell him I hadn't fallen for their little prank, but didn't want to spoil their fun. When noon rolled around and Dad still wasn't back, I started to get worried. Maybe he had fallen and hit his head on a rock or something. Uncle Roger was beside himself. He told me he would have already gone looking for Dad, but didn't want to leave me alone at the camp. We decided to go look for him. Uncle Roger found what looked like a scuffle, and we headed off in that direction. He told me to stay right with him as we struggled through the forest, looking for any sign of Dad. I was starting to doubt that this was a prank. I was getting worried about Dad. The further we went, the more I realized how wrong I'd been. I wanted Dad to jump out and scare me just so I'd know he was okay. We walked around for hours searching for him, but we couldn't find him. I was beyond worried now, and I could tell Uncle Roger was too, but he didn't let on. He just kept saying Dad was probably already back at the campsite by now. When the sun started sinking low in the sky, we gave up our search and headed back. Twice we lost our way and had to double back to get to the site. There weren't many trails out here, at least not ones people had made. When we got back to the site, I ran to our tent, hoping he would be there, but he wasn't. We ate a quick supper and turned in for the night. Uncle Roger promised me he would wake me up when Dad came back. October 4th, Uncle Roger never woke me. Dad didn't come back. I said we should call for help, but he told me Dad had the only phone. We were trying to decide what to do when we heard rustling in the woods and the birds went silent. We looked around for the source of the noise, and unfortunately, we found it. There was a thing coming toward us. It stood on its hind legs, and its body made these loud cracking sounds, like its bones were snapping into or out of place, echoing all around us. This thing was huge. I literally froze. My body refused to move as this horror came toward us. Uncle Roger grabbed me and yanked me over behind his tent. We tried to hide, but this thing saw us and let out a massive roar. We were so close I could see blood on its claws and teeth. I prayed it wasn't Dad's. "What do we do?" I said. He put his finger up to his lips. It looked over at us and then went into my tent, like it was searching for something. "Come on," Uncle Roger said. We snuck away from the monster as quietly as possible. We slipped down the bank of the creek and walked downstream in the water. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "There's a bridge downstream. If we're quiet enough and that thing loses our scent, we could hide under it and hope it goes away." I focused on walking as quietly as I could through the water. The sound of the creek was loud, so I was hopeful it wouldn't see or hear us. It seemed like forever until we reached the bridge. It was a small wooden bridge that spanned the creek, allowing hikers to pass over. There wasn't a lot of cover. We tried to wedge ourselves into the shadows at the farthest end of it. Time slowed to a standstill as I sat there on the uncomfortable rock, shivering. Neither of us had our jackets on, and the sun had gone down, taking the warm air with it. I started to doze when I felt a nudge. I looked up, and Uncle Roger was motioning me to be quiet. I was about to ask why when I heard the creak of a board on the bridge right above my head. It wasn't the steady walk of a hiker going down the trail. It was a slow, deliberate step, someone sneaking or hunting. I listened in mortal terror as the board slowly gave way to the weight of whatever was on it, one slow step at a time. As if I wasn't cold enough, my teeth began to chatter with fear. It couldn't have been very loud. Uncle Roger barely heard it. But he went into silent convulsions, motioning me to stop. I bit my tongue to keep the noise down and continued to listen. Only there was nothing to listen to. Whatever was on the bridge had stopped moving. It was as if it was listening to be sure it had heard something. I strained my ears, and when I did, I heard sniffing. The thing was trying to catch our scent. For the first time, I noticed there was a slight breeze. It was blowing in the same direction the water flowed, but I had no idea which side of the bridge the creature was on. The wind could be our savior or our doom. Another slow footstep sounded like a bomb going off as the board creaked beneath it. For the briefest of moments, it seemed like it was moving away toward the far end of the bridge. I hoped and prayed that was the case as another footstep sounded, then another. I breathed a silent sigh of relief as I heard it step off the edge of the bridge and onto the trail. My relief was short-lived, though, as I saw a face peek around the corner and peer under the bridge. I froze in terror as this thing that looked like a giant, monstrous dog walking on its hind legs snuck around the corner of the bridge and dipped its feet into the water. It sniffed the air and poked its snout into the shadows under the far side of the bridge. Coming up empty, it turned its focus to the side of the bridge where we were hiding. Daylight had faded to dusk. There was precious little light to see by. That was our only saving grace. The shadows were darker here, making us nearly invisible, but that was rapidly ending as the beast approached. My mind was vapor-locked. I had no clue what to do. Running would just give us away more quickly. It was looking like our only choice was to die. At that moment, I was 100% sure of what had happened to Dad. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks at the thought of my father being torn apart by this monster. As I prepared to die, I felt Uncle Roger lean over a little closer. He was right in front of me, and it was hard to see the monster. I saw his hand move down toward the ground and pick up a stone the size of his fist. I knew right away what was happening. He was trying to shield me. He would offer himself as a sacrifice to protect me. My tears redoubled, making it hard to see. The monster was almost on us. It hadn't acted like it knew we were there, but at this point, it didn't matter. A few more steps, and all doubt would be removed. I saw it reach out with its terrible claws that nearly touched Uncle Roger's nose. This was it. Suddenly, it stopped. It lifted its head and sniffed the air. I saw the hair on its back bristle. Then, in a heartbeat, it disappeared. Uncle Roger slowly stood and looked around. I tried to do the same, but my legs didn't want to cooperate. I dislodged some stones as I stood, making a little noise and causing Uncle Roger to hiss at me. We stood silently, waiting for that thing to come jumping out at us from whatever hiding place it was in. After a few minutes, I began to hope that we were okay. Uncle Roger led the way back to our camp. He said we should change into dry clothes and get a little rest. It felt so good to be warm again. I snuggled up in my sleeping bag and wrote this message so that if we didn't make it, someone would know what happened. I hoped my dad was as lucky as we were. I read through the entire message, then went back and reread the description of the creature. If it was what I thought it was amazing they were still alive. Knowing what I was tracking put me on guard and made me wonder if I was being hunted right now. If it had intentionally left things as they were to ensnare another victim. I didn't have much hope of finding them, but I would look anyway. I started with the tracks in the camp, specifically the ones around the tents. It seemed like the boy and his uncle had gone toward the creek. The creature's tracks went that way too. It followed them to the creek, where its tracks seemed to wander around as if it had lost its prey. I saw where they went into the water to throw off its scent. Smart move. I followed the meandering tracks until they came to a small bridge that forded the creek. The tracks went over the bridge, then through the creek underneath it. That didn't make sense unless they were hiding in the shadows. The creature's tracks made a sudden turn and went toward the trail, then up a hill, almost like something spooked it. If it was what I thought, I couldn't imagine anything spooking it. I followed the creature's tracks up over the hill. Then they doubled back and followed the creek from the top of the ridge. I noticed there was a good view of the creek. It didn't make sense to be going this way until I found myself back in the camp. It had put them right back in its sights. I was confused for a while. I couldn't find a second set of tracks where they left the second time. If the creature had slaughtered them at the campsite, there would be a lot more blood. But there wasn't. In fact, I couldn't find any proof they'd come back. Then it hit me. I went back and looked at the tracks again. There were a few here and there that were doubled. The boy and his uncle must have come back here after the bridge, then left the same way as before. The disturbing thing was, I still hadn't seen any tracks of the father. I circled around the camp slowly, looking for anything I might have missed. Eventually, I found a set of adult tracks leaving a tent and going to the edge of the trees. They stopped facing a tree. There was a dark spot on the bark, a couple of feet up. This had the earmarks of a late-night bathroom break, but the confusing thing was the tracks never returned, like he had stopped there to relieve himself and then just disappeared. I searched all around the tree when I made a startling discovery. There were flecks of blood farther up on the bark. I circled out further from the tree and found my terrible discovery, tracks of the creature with drops of blood beside them. My marrow turned to ice at the implication. I followed my new trail, hoping I wouldn't find what my mind was telling me I would. I tried to report to the station on my radio, but strangely, all I got in response was static. I knew there were areas out here that didn't get good reception, but I didn't think this was one of them, right near a posted campsite just off a trail. I decided I would try again later. I adjusted my backpack and started off after my prey. As a precaution, I pulled out my sidearm and made sure it was loaded. It seemed like a silly thing to do, but when dealing with a dangerous alpha predator, it's best to make sure you're ready to shoot. My hand shook a little when I put my gun back in its holster. I knew this was dangerous. I knew it would be just as easy to go back to the station and let search and rescue take care of it. But I also knew that there was a man who was in the clutches of a deadly creature, and he was losing blood. I didn't have time to waste. I followed the tracks as best I could through the brush and fallen trees. I would lose the trail sometimes, only to pick it up again when I found a few more drops of blood. The tracks ran along the base of the hill, heading west until they came to a stop. It was right in front of a mountain. I looked all around, but the trail had disappeared. Finally, in desperation, I looked up and noticed a cave partway up the mountain. I thought about going up there, but was unsure. That could be the home of this creature, or it could be the home of a dozen other animals, none of which would appreciate me storming into their living room unannounced. After another thorough look around the area, I decided it was likely where my prey had gone. Clouds had been rolling in all day, and now they decided they were done playing nice. The rain began slowly enough, but was soon coming down in sheets. The cave was looking better as I covered my eyes and tried to see where I was going. It was raining so hard I couldn't see the cave anymore. I just kept pressing forward in what I hoped was a straight line, over fallen trees, through brush and rapidly rising streams. I finally looked up and saw I was at the base of the mountain. My direction was off by a little bit, and I had ended up a few dozen yards to the right of it, but it was no matter. I started climbing the mountain, being extra careful of my footing, especially in this torrential downpour. After a few slips, including one that nearly had me tumbling off the mountain, I made it to the mouth of the cave. I slipped inside and enjoyed a moment without water dumping on me. I looked down, and the water dripping off of me made a little puddle, like I had brought my own rain cloud into the cave with me. I shook off as much water as I could, as quietly as possible. The rain pouring down outside made loud splashes inside the cave. It would have been difficult to hear anything else, but I still wanted to be sure. I buckled and set the backpack down just inside the mouth of the cave. The rain had made it gain extra weight, and I didn't know if I would have to move fast. I opened my pack and got out my bottle of water and drank. It had been a while since I had drunk anything, and I chugged half of it down. I closed it and saved the other half in case I got out of here alive. With that happy thought rattling around in my brain, I stowed the water bottle back in my pack and pulled out a small flashlight. I turned it on while pointing it at the floor. The bright beam illuminated the cave. It was large as caves go. I could stand up in it and not reach the ceiling. There were many boulders and stones. It wasn't a smooth floor. The walls were rough. There weren't any cave drawings in here. I walked slowly. Each step felt like I was closer to my doom. I pulled out my gun and held it tightly, the sense of foreboding thick in the air. Two thoughts impressed themselves on me. Firing a gun in here would probably deafen me, and the stench was horrific. It smelled like an open sewer in the middle of August. As I crept deeper into the cave, the sounds of the rain diminished, replaced by an eerie silence. I could hear the steps of my feet, my breathing, and my heart pounding. I was seriously considering turning around and leaving when I saw something ahead of me move. It was big, at least as big as me. I dove against the wall for some cover, forgetting that I was holding a bright light in my hand, so it didn't matter if I tried to hide as long as the light was on. I pointed at the floor, but didn't turn it off. I heard a shuffling sound getting closer. I was tempted to turn off the light, but giving the edge to this creature was not a good idea. It already had the home field advantage. I heard it sniffing, but I couldn't see it yet. I decided to find out more by bringing my light up and shining it deeper into the cave. I got the shock of my life when my light landed on the creature, and it was only a few steps away. It was big, at least 6 feet tall, and looked like a dog with a long snout, only its body seemed elongated. It stood on its hind legs and had hands attached to muscular arms. Overall, it looked like a nightmare. Part 2. It recoiled from the light and let out a growl. It was all I could do to keep from soiling myself. Without thinking, I pointed my gun and fired. The sound was deafening. My ears instantly started ringing. The creature roared at me, then turned and ran deeper into the cave. It had roared a mere few feet from me, yet I barely heard it. I stumbled and had to take a minute to steady myself. Then I started following it deeper into the cave. To this day, I really don't know why, other than needing to know if the hiker was alive. I looked at the ground to see if there was any blood, but there wasn't. I must have just startled it with the shot. That wasn't great news. I'd hoped I would have hit it and that it was wounded. Just scared meant it would be ready to fight when I saw it again. After all, I'm sure to the creature I was the invader, and it was defending its home. I continued farther into the cave, shining my light and watching for any sudden movement. I had no idea where it was or if it was setting a trap for me. I felt a whiff of air and jumped back a split second before the claws sliced the air where my face would have been. I rolled and came up shooting, holding my light beside the gun to illuminate my target. I fired over and over, pointing and shooting without having the time to aim. I watched as it ducked every shot and ran with inhuman speed. Just before it disappeared from sight, I saw it skip a step as I fired my last shot. My hope soared that I had hit it at least once. I ejected the magazine and put a fresh one in, reminding myself that I only had one more and chastising myself for not being more careful with my limited ammo. I justified it by telling myself there's no use dying with a full magazine. I followed once again, nearly jumping for joy when I came to the spot where it had disappeared and saw a spot of fresh blood on the ground. I was hoping for more, but as I went, the drops were every few feet. Even though it didn't seem like much, at the speed it was running, I was sure it had sprung a major leak. I followed the trail deeper into the cave. There was a chill in the air that made me shudder. My mind told me it felt like a tomb. My tomb. I shook off those thoughts and continued until the blood stopped. I shone my light on the small puddle and the ground beyond, where there was no blood. My mind screamed at me that it was a trap. I shone my light all around, even on the ceiling, but I couldn't see it. I started backing out the same way I'd come in, my eyes darting all around in search of my prey. It hit me like a bulldozer going 60 miles an hour. It had come out of nowhere and rammed me in the back. I sprawled out on the floor, rolling to a stop. My flashlight lay a few feet away, and I had no idea where the gun was. The wind was knocked out of me. I tried to breathe, but couldn't. I just lay there, gasping for air. It slowly circled around me, growling and bristling. I knew it was going for the kill. I screamed at my brain to move, but my body refused to cooperate. I tried to focus on my breathing and regain mobility. As it circled closer, I could see its breath chugging out of its mouth like a steam engine. I knew it was time. My arm was the first to recover. I slowly moved it toward the flashlight. It stopped circling just as I got a grip on the light. I saw the creature hunching to lunge at me. I clicked the light to strobe and aimed it at the creature's face. It screamed and clawed at the air as if it could fight off the light. I rose to my knees, keeping the light on it. When it turned away, I shone it around desperately, searching for my gun. I found it a few yards away and tried to run for it, but my body hadn't fully recovered and I fell flat on my face. My life in the balance, I didn't bother with the pain of my freshly broken nose. I crawled toward the gun with every ounce of energy in me. It seemed like an eternity until I put my hand on the grip and brought it to bear on the creature. It had recovered and was running at me full speed. I shone the strobe at it again, and it veered away from the light. I stood and aimed at it, squeezing the trigger. I saw the satisfying impact of the bullet in its side and squeezed the trigger again, making another hole on the far side of its chest. I squeezed over and over, hitting it each time and watching it reel from the impact, but it stayed on its feet. It growled and charged as my slide locked back, showing an empty chamber. I shone the strobe in its eyes once more, but this time it just ran off to the other side of the room. I used the distraction to eject my magazine and load in the last full one. I released the slide and started firing immediately, hitting it in the hindquarter and leg, but not stopping it. I stopped shooting and forced myself to concentrate. I aimed carefully as it ran toward me, and at the right moment, I squeezed the trigger. It went down hard, squealing like a stuck pig. It thrashed and clawed at its face, tumbling over itself. Blood flew everywhere from its many gunshot wounds, but it still continued flailing about and squealing in pain. After a few minutes of this, it finally settled down and was still enough for me to see my handiwork. I had shot it in the eye. There was nothing left there but a bloody hole. I didn't dare approach it. I stood at a respectful distance and watched, my gun ready if it tried to make a move. Its squeals became moans, finally turning into a heavy sigh, and then it was still. I shone the light on it, feeling cautiously optimistic that this thing was no longer a threat. Then I remembered what I was doing here in the first place. I tried to get my bearings and proceeded further into the cave. My main thought was not only finding the hiker alive, but also hoping and praying there wasn't another one of those creatures here. I didn't have another fight like that in me. The path curved downward until it came to a large open area. I shone the light around, looking for anything. Off in the far corner, there was a flash of red as I panned through. I approached it cautiously and found it was a jacket. Inside the jacket was a piece of meat that used to be a human being. His throat had been ripped out, and his legs were gone. All that was left of them were some bones. The thing must have been working its way up, saving the arms and torso for later. The man's face was a frozen scream. I can't even imagine the horror of being dragged away from your loved ones, only to be murdered and eaten in some cold, dark cave. I wasn't even sure if he was dead when the thing ripped his legs off. I had to stop focusing on such things and decide what to do. If I left the remains here, there was no doubt some other animal would come by and finish off what the creature had started. I needed to try to get him to his family for closure and a proper burial. I bent down, trying to figure out how to carry him. A fireman's carry was out. There were no legs for counterbalance. In the end, I picked him up by his arms and flung them over my shoulder, holding on to them and turning his body into some macabre backpack. I started back out of the cave, hoping I'd be able to carry him all the way back to the campsite and finally back to my truck. As I trudged back through the cave, I came to the section where our fight had taken place. Shell casings and blood were strewn about the ground. I wondered to myself how I had avoided getting hit by a stray ricochet. When I looked over to where the creature lay, only it wasn't there. I shone my light all around frantically, whipping around, but it was gone. I found the spot where it had lain still, where I thought it had died. There was a large pool of blood there, but no body. I pulled my gun out of my holster, ejected the magazine, and checked to see how many rounds I had left. There were only 2. I hoped wherever that thing was, it was no longer in the mood for hunting or revenge. In the end, I decided there was nothing I could do. If the thing attacked me, I was defenseless, carrying literal dead weight on my back. I holstered the gun and hitched up my human backpack, then shone the light toward the mouth of the cave and kept walking. My hearing was just starting to return to normal, although I was sure I would have some permanent hearing loss. I could hear the shuffling of my feet as I staggered toward the cave opening. When I got there, I found a world transformed. Daylight was just starting to peek its way around the dark. However, the rain had created a massive fog bank. I couldn't see anything down in the valley I'd come from. It was a sea of fog. Only the peaks of the mountains escaped its suffocating blanket. I looked over and saw my backpack patiently waiting for my return. I lay my burden down and got the water bottle out, glad that I had saved the last drink for now. As I sat on the edge of the cave precipice, I looked down and wondered how I was going to get the body down there without falling to my own death. For an instant, I was tempted to throw it down and find it at the bottom once I climbed down. But I thought this fellow had been through enough and didn't need the indignity of becoming a human frisbee. I dug through my backpack and found some bungee cords. I bungeed him to my back and carefully started my descent, leaving my faithful backpack to watch me desert it. I wished I could take it with me, but there was no way I could carry both. As I climbed down, there were a few times I lost footing and nearly took the short and deadly route down. Fortunately, I made it to the bottom in one piece. Instead of celebrating, though, I discovered a new problem. The fog was so thick I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I had no idea how I was going to find my way out of there. I decided to go straight away from the mountain and hope the fog cleared as I went. The rain had turned the forest into a marshland. The ground was soft and the streams had overgrown their banks. I found myself wading through knee-deep water on more than one occasion as I trudged along, hoping I had enough energy to get back without collapsing from exhaustion. Two thoughts chased each other around my mind. Where were the other hikers? And where was the creature? I hadn't seen any other remains in the cave. If it had killed them, it hadn't had time to take them back to the cave yet. Perhaps my pursuit had forced it to retreat before it could retrieve its other bounty. I had kept my ears open for any sounds of it following me. The most disconcerting thing was the lack of forest noises. The animals and birds were strangely silent. Usually that meant there was a predator nearby. In this ungodly fog, perhaps they were just sleeping, waiting for it to clear. That sounded good. It gave me the false illusion that I wasn't in mortal danger from a wounded alpha predator bent on revenge. But I couldn't focus on that, or worry would drain my resolve to get us both out of there. I took a break from trudging and tried to get my bearings. I checked my watch. I had been walking for over an hour. It was late morning, and the sun should have been high in the sky, but the oppressive fog continued to smother it. I looked around, but there was nothing to see except the dingy gray curtain of hopelessness. I was about to collapse and give up when I heard it, the faint sound of hope. I could hear the creek running. As hope rose, it was suddenly dashed. I heard the sound of a footstep behind me. I whipped around so fast that my macabre backpack nearly made me lose my balance. I couldn't see anything through the fog, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. With a renewed surge of determination, along with a strong desire to elude whatever was pursuing me, I set out toward the sound of the creek. My pace was still slow, but fearing for my life was a great motivator. I had no doubt whatsoever that the footsteps behind me belonged to the creature bent on revenge. After what seemed like an eternity, I gazed at the most awe-inspiring sight I'd seen all day: Wolf Creek and all its 6-foot-wide, overflowing banks of glory. I followed it until I came across Lakeshore Trail, and the journey became much easier. The fog was even beginning to lift, which was both a blessing and a curse. I could finally see far enough behind me to confirm that the creature was indeed following me. I had wondered the entire time why it hadn't overtaken me, but now that I caught sight of it, I understood. It was grotesque. It looked like it came straight from hell. Its one eye socket was leaking gore, and the many bullet wounds covering its body seeped blood. There were places where I could see internal organs trying to escape, and its right leg had a bullet wound that caused it to limp severely. As I watched, I wondered how it had made it this far. But then I looked into its remaining eye and saw the intense rage burning within. I knew I would die a horribly grotesque death if I slowed enough for it to catch up. We continued this slow, grim pursuit until I reached the banks where Wolf Creek opened up into the lake. My energy was nearly gone. At one point, I considered dropping my human backpack in hopes that the creature would feed on it instead of me, but then I would have failed. I came here to find this hiker and bring him back. The thought lit a fire deep within me. I came to the edge of the lake with the creature a mere few yards behind me. I glanced around, hoping to see a boat I could flag down, but no such luck. With no other choice, I waded into the water. It was cold, but instead of refreshing me, it chilled me and sapped what little strength I had left. The creature entered the water behind me and seemed to be gaining on me. It got deeper to the point where I was no longer able to walk and had to start swimming. The far side of the lake looked like it was miles away, even though I knew it was much less than that. I swam for all I was worth, knowing at any moment I could be pulled under by the creature. My passenger, strapped to my back, wasn't helping either, the literal definition of dead weight. Every minute, I had to fight off the urge to dump him. When I finally reached the other side, I was exhausted. I lay there on the shore, waiting for the creature to disembowel me, but unable to move to defend myself in any way. With great effort, I turned to look back and see when my doom would come. To my great surprise, I saw it staring at me from the far beach. I guessed it couldn't swim. I chuckled to myself as I lay there, gathering strength for the continued journey back to the truck. Eventually, I got there. As I opened the door for a fleeting moment, I considered putting the hiker in the passenger seat. But then I looked at the wet, gore-soaked torso and reconsidered, gently laying him in the truck bed. The drive back was long, and I continually had to shake myself to stay awake. But eventually, I made it to the cabin. I stumbled up to the door and knocked once. "Oh my God," the woman said when she saw me. "Are you all right?" I hung my head. "No, but I will be after about 3 days of sleep. Unfortunately, I have bad news for you. I found your husband, but not your son or brother-in-law." A man and a boy came out of the cabin and stared at me. I instantly knew who they were and grabbed them both in a huge hug. "I'm so glad you made it out," I said, fighting back tears. Thanks," the man said, pulling out of my hug. "Who are you again?" "He's the ranger that came to look for all 3 of you," the woman said. "I don't understand. Your tracks were confusing," I said. "I followed them down to the bridge, but then they went back up to the campsite." "We got some rest," the boy said. "Then Uncle Roger came and said we were going. We left everything and slipped away to the boat, rowed across the river, and left." I smiled. "I'm very glad you did." He looked at me with expectant eyes. "You said you found my dad?" My face fell. "I did, but it was too late." "So I nodded solemnly. "Where is he?" "He's in my truck, but you don't want to see that." Before I could say another word, he ran to the truck and looked in the passenger seat. A look of confusion fell over his eyes when he saw no one there. Then he slowly looked toward the bed of the truck. He stepped back and peered over the side. He instantly dissolved into tears and slid down the side of the truck, sobbing. "I'm so sorry," I said to the woman and the man. She grabbed me and gave me a hug. "Don't be," she said. "Without you, we wouldn't have known for weeks, months, maybe even years what had happened. We would have gone on looking with false hope. You've given us a chance for closure and to properly grieve." She released me, and I wiped my eyes. I looked at the man and walked down to the truck. He followed, and we gently removed the body and laid him on the couch, then covered him with a blanket. The boy followed us back to the cabin, but wouldn't look at me or anyone else. He sat in a chair and stared at the blanket covering his father's body. I knew I had done all I could, so I excused myself and started toward the door. I paused and said to the boy, "I promise I'll make sure that thing never hurts anyone again." He looked up at me, eyes full of tears, and said, "How will that help my dad?" His mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand to silence her. I knew the boy was just hurting. I left without another word. On the drive back, I called the station and told them everything that had happened, then told them I was going home and calling off for the following day. After getting home, stumbling into a shower, and collapsing in bed, there was only one thought on my mind. I would return to Wolf Creek very soon with more and bigger guns. I would end that monster if it was the last thing I did. But that is another story. Thanks for listening, Horror Cowboys. See you tomorrow at the same time. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a cop in a small town isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies where every day is a shootout or a high-speed chase. It's mostly handling neighbor disputes over where someone's fence ends or someone's dog barking too much. My name's Lucas Giroux, and I've been wearing the badge for 9 years here in Chesterville, Louisiana. Population about 2,000, give or take. I love this town. It's quiet, peaceful for the most part, and I like that. My days are usually filled with mundane tasks, which suits me just fine. I didn't sign up to be some action hero, but that was before what happened in 2014. That night, everything changed. Chesterville sits on the edge of Lake Vere, a slow-moving body of water surrounded by cypress trees and swampland. People here fish, drink, and go about their lives. It was a pretty uneventful Thursday evening. I was sitting in the patrol car near the lake, enjoying the last of my coffee. That's when the call came through. Domestic disturbance, 14 miles out of town, near the edge of the bayou. Some old shack out there. Probably a drunk couple having a fight. I sighed, thinking about how cold my coffee was going to get by the time I got back. I could have ignored the call. In a town this small, people mostly resolve their issues on their own. But it's my job, and I'm not the kind of guy to leave a job half done. So I punched the gas and headed toward the edge of the swamp, the smell of rotting vegetation creeping into the car through the vents. The air always smells different out there. Heavy, like something's growing in the darkness. The address was off the main road. Way off. I had to take a gravel path that was barely wide enough for my cruiser, with branches scraping against the sides like they were trying to keep me from going any further. The place was almost hidden behind thick trees, vines practically choking the building itself. It was an old, decaying wooden structure, more of a cabin than a house. When I stepped out of the car, everything felt wrong. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, but I shook it off. Maybe I was just on edge because it was so quiet. And in a town where quiet usually means safety, this felt different, like something was waiting. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. That's when I heard it, a scraping noise from inside, something heavy being dragged across the floor. I called out, "Chesterville PD, anyone home?" Still nothing. Now, I've dealt with drunks, domestic fights, and all sorts of noise complaints, but the sound coming from inside wasn't something I'd heard before. My hand instinctively went to my gun as I tried the doorknob. Locked. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, when I noticed something strange, a set of footprints leading around the back. But not human ones. These prints were larger, clawed, like some kind of animal. But whatever made them was walking on two legs, and they were fresh. I was starting to think this wasn't just some domestic dispute. I followed the prints, feeling a chill in the pit of my stomach. As I reached the back of the cabin, I saw the door was ajar, hanging on its hinges. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell, like rotting meat mixed with damp earth. The cabin was small, just one room, with a dirty mattress on the floor and a table covered in old newspapers. But what caught my eye was the blood. It was smeared across the floor, thick and dark, leading to a corner where something was slumped. I shone the flashlight on it. It was a man, or what was left of him. His body had been torn apart, like he'd been mauled by something much bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these parts. His chest was ripped open, ribs exposed, and his face, well, there wasn't much left to recognize. I barely had time to process the scene when I heard that same dragging noise again, but closer this time, coming from behind me. I turned, heart racing, and shone the light toward the sound. Something was moving in the shadows. Something big. At first I thought it was a bear, but bears don't move like that, and they sure as hell don't stand on two legs. It stepped into the light and I froze. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with matted fur and a face that looked almost human, but twisted, distorted, like something halfway between a person and a wolf. Its claws were long, too long for anything natural, and its mouth was smeared with blood, teeth glistening like knives. I didn't hesitate. I drew my gun and fired, emptying the magazine into the thing's chest. But it barely flinched. The bullets hit, sure, but they didn't seem to do much more than piss it off. It let out this low sound, like it was irritated more than hurt, and took a step toward me. I backed up, reloading as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I've never been a great shot, but at this range, it didn't seem to matter. Nothing was going to stop this thing. It lunged. I dove out of the way, crashing into a shelf that sent bottles and cans scattering across the floor. My head was spinning, but I managed to scramble to my feet and run for the door. I don't know how, but I made it back to the car, slamming the door shut just as it slammed into the side of the cruiser, rocking it on its wheels. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud as I gunned it back down the gravel path. The thing didn't follow me. It just stood there, in the rearview mirror, watching. As I sped away, Its shape slowly faded into the darkness of the swamp. When I finally reached the main road, I stopped, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to call it in. But what the hell was I going to say? That some kind of monster tore a man apart and nearly killed me? I thought about it for a long moment, staring at the radio, before deciding to do something I never thought I'd do. I lied. When I called it in, I said I found the man already dead. Looked like some kind of animal attack. Maybe a bear, maybe a wild dog. Hell, maybe both. I didn't mention the thing I saw. I couldn't. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. But here's the thing. I wasn't the only one out there that night. I found out later that 2 fishermen had been on the lake, close enough to the cabin to hear the gunshots. They saw something too. Something large, moving through the trees. They didn't get a good look at it, but they said it wasn't a bear. Wasn't anything they'd ever seen before. And they swore it walked on 2 legs. The next morning, I went back out there with the sheriff and a couple of deputies. We found the body, or what was left of it, but there was no sign of the creature. Just those same strange tracks leading off into the swamp. The sheriff wrote it up as an animal attack, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew something didn't add up. I've thought about that night a lot since then, about how close I came to ending up like that poor bastard in the cabin, and about what's still out there, lurking in the swamp. Some nights, when it's real quiet, I wonder if it's still watching. But I've learned not to go looking for answers. Sometimes, in a place like this, it's better to let the mysteries stay buried. I pulled into the campground just before sunset, expecting the usual, a few quiet families roasting marshmallows, maybe a couple of seasoned hikers turning in early. Instead, I was greeted by the clamor of loud music echoing off the tree line. The source? A cluster of tents circled around a blazing fire where a group of frat boys hollered and laughed like they had the whole place to themselves. Every so often, other campers peeked out of their tents, uneasy and clearly wishing guys would tone it down. I couldn't blame them. Noise doesn't just shatter the calm of a campsite, it draws attention from things best left undisturbed. Out here, folks whisper about the ghost cats, those local mountain lions known to slip into camps without warning. I'd seen enough tracks in eerily close proximity to sleeping bags to know these stories were more than just rumors. I parked my rig a little ways off and walked over, picking my path carefully around scattered coolers and folding chairs. As I got close, the frat boys paused their banter, giving me that half-attentive look. They were mostly older teens or early 20-somethings, still buzzing with alcohol and late-night bravado. Evening, I started, trying to keep it friendly but firm. I'm the ranger on duty. Got some other campers worried you're attracting unwanted attention. I motioned toward the looming tree line. These woods have a reputation, and it's not for the best sing-alongs. They laughed it off at first, so I leaned in, lowering my voice. I described how mountain lions sometimes stalk the perimeter of noisy camps, how you won't spot them until they're practically brushing against your tent walls. I explained how we call them ghost cats because of their uncanny silence, the way they seem to appear out of nowhere. They sobered up a bit. A couple exchanged uncertain glances, but one just shrugged, muttering that they'd keep it down. I issued a final warning anyway. Stay quiet, don't wander off, and if you hear anything odd outside in the dark, make no sound. I only hoped they'd actually listen. Once I'd done all I could, I headed back to the station. My buddy Jim was there, flipping through some old wildlife photos. He raised an eyebrow when I told him about the frat boys. Let me guess, blasting music, ignoring every rule we've got, right? He said, clearly unimpressed. Bingo, I replied. And they're not taking the mountain lion threat seriously. He let out a quiet laugh that contained zero humor. We both knew this was more than a minor annoyance. If something did happen, we'd be the ones hauling them out, or dealing with an injured cat that got too comfortable around humans. That's when we started talking about a plan. Not to harm anyone, obviously, but to rattle them enough that they'd finally grasp the gravity of a place like this. Jim reminded me about the old lion pelt in our interpretive center. Used it once or twice for educational tours, though it always gave me the creeps. Its glass eyes caught the light in this unnerving way, like it was still alive. We also had night vision goggles stashed away, thanks to a budget splurge before the new fiscal year. Perfect for sneaking around in the dark, unseen by unsuspecting campers. Over the next half hour, we pieced together a strategy: fake prints, hidden growls, and a well-timed appearance of a lion silhouette. It might just be the jolt they needed to pack up, or at the very least, dial down the party volume. Grabbing the pelt from a dusty storage closet, I noticed the faint, musty smell of fur mixed with something almost medicinal. I ran my hand over the stiff mane, shivering at how realistic it still felt. Next, we tested the night vision goggles. Even in the dim station lights, they turned everything into an eerie green that made my pulse spike. By the time we had our gear ready, the sun had slipped below the horizon. The woods outside transformed into a dark maze. I had this sense that the frat boys, oblivious in their tents, were about to discover that being out here isn't just a carefree getaway. If they refused to respect the campground's unspoken rules, well, we'd give them a night they wouldn't forget. Jim killed the overhead lights as we locked up. We checked our plan one last time, and I took a breath, settling my nerves. We were about to sneak into that campsite, loaded with props and a fair share of wild imagination. In the back of my mind, I thought about the actual ghost cats prowling these hills. I hoped we wouldn't run into a real one while pulling our prank. It's one thing to frighten a few campers. It's another to come face to face with the genuine article. Still, I felt this rush of adrenaline as we set off into the darkness. Maybe it was the satisfaction of delivering a wake-up call. Or maybe it was just that strange, hushed energy you feel whenever you realize you're not at the top of the food chain out here. Either way, there was no turning back. We had our plan, and we were committed to seeing it through. The night was only getting darker, and the silent woods seemed to hold their breath, waiting for whatever came next. I hunched down in the cramped front seat of our Jeep, double-checking that the lion pelt was still tucked out of sight. Outside, moonlight drenched the forest in faint silver, and every rustle of wind through the branches made me brace for actual movement. I couldn't help scanning the dark spaces between the trees, searching for any flicker of eyes that might belong to the real thing. My coworker Jim was fidgeting in the passenger seat, adjusting the small PA system we'd use for the recorded roars. "Ready?" he asked, voice low. "As I'll ever be," I replied, half hoping those frat kids were already asleep and half itching to put our plan into action. Either way, we needed to move quickly. The night sky was starless, and visibility would only get worse. I eased the Jeep toward their campsite, headlights off to keep our approach silent. Stopping a good distance away, we slipped out and quietly shut the doors. The path under our boots was damp from an earlier drizzle, which made our footfalls softer, but also gave the soil a perfect texture for stamping fake tracks. One by one, we planted oversized paw prints in the mud, making sure to press deeply near the tents. Every so often, we paused to listen, worried someone inside might stir and peek outside. But all we heard was the faint crackle of a dying fire. Next, Jim propped the lion pelt onto two sturdy sticks we duct-taped together. Seen straight on, it was eerily convincing. Massive head, snarling mouth, and the kind of glassy eyes that appeared to stare into your soul. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting an actual animal to emerge, drawn by the uncanny shape. With the pelt set up, we turned to the other part of our plan. The roars. We'd preloaded the PA system with a series of snarls and growls from real mountain lion recordings. Jim started them at a low volume from across the clearing. The first noise rumbled through the darkness like a threat, and I could almost sense the campers tensing in their tents. A second roar followed, echoing off the surrounding trees, making it sound as if multiple predators were encircling the area. I slipped back into the Jeep and carefully flicked on the headlights, aiming them so they backlit the pelt. From the angle of the beam, it looked like a living, breathing cat pacing along the outskirts of the camp. Jim shouted from behind a bush, "Stay in your tents!" His voice shook with just enough panic to convince anyone he was facing a genuine attack. "She's moving around us," he hollered, layering more drama into the moment. Then he bellowed, "There's another one." The reaction inside those tents was instant. Muffled cries, frantic rustling, the scrape of tent zippers being yanked shut. I killed the lights in one sudden click. Darkness swallowed the campsite. Jim dropped the sticks, and we ditched the lion pelt. In under a minute, we tore back to the Jeep, adrenaline hammering through every vein. As I started the engine and sped off, I thought I detected one final roar playing through the PA system, echoing behind us like a last warning. When dawn finally broke, the camp's radio chatter indicated that nobody had poked their head out until well into the morning. From our station windows, we could imagine their pale faces and wide eyes discovering the huge paw prints scattered around, some alarmingly close to their tent doors. We heard they packed up not long after, throwing nervous glances over their shoulders at the looming forest. No doubt, they were rattled to the core. Jim and I swapped glances, both relieved to hear they were safe, but also satisfied we'd given them something to think about. We'd wanted them to respect these woods, or at least remember that nature doesn't tolerate fools. From what we heard later, they told everyone about the mountain lion attack they'd barely survived. Maybe next time, they'd remember that out here. Silence can be the difference between a peaceful night and something far more dangerous. My name is Mara Caldwell, and I'm 28 years old. This happened along Paint Creek Scenic Trail in West Virginia during a trip I'd planned to reconnect with my art, and frankly, myself. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape from the noise of the world, but instead, it became something I still can't fully explain. I had just come off a long relationship that ended in the kind of breakup that leaves you questioning everything: your choices, your direction, your worth. Art was the only thing that felt steady, so I packed up my RV and hit the road. Paint Creek had come up in my research as a serene, lesser-known spot for nature lovers. I thought it would be the perfect place to spend a few days sketching and painting in solitude. When I arrived, the place was exactly as described: quiet, secluded, and hauntingly beautiful. The creek meandered through dense woods, its surface catching the sunlight like shards of glass. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the air carried a faint chill that hinted at the coming fall. I parked my RV near an old wooden bridge that crossed the creek. The bridge looked like it belonged in a ghost story, its weathered boards sagging slightly, but I couldn't resist its charm. I set up camp and spent the first day wandering the trails and sketching the landscape. The stillness was almost too perfect, but I chalked it up to being unused to this level of isolation. That night, I sat by the creek, working on a watercolor of the bridge as the sun dipped below the horizon. The forest around me grew darker, and the silence became oppressive. There were no birds, no insects, just the sound of the water trickling over rocks. I tried to focus on my painting, but a strange unease crept over me. It was like the air had shifted, growing heavier, colder. And then I heard it, a faint humming. It was soft at first, almost melodic, but it didn't seem to have a source. It wasn't coming from the creek or the woods, it was just there. I froze, my brush hovering over the paper. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it was a woman's voice, humming a tune I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. The humming stopped abruptly, as if I'd startled it. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. I told myself it must have been the wind or some trick of acoustics, packed up my supplies, and hurried back to the RV. The next morning, I woke to find my art supplies scattered across the ground outside the RV. My brushes were snapped in half, my paint spilled and smeared across the dirt. My first thought was that an animal had gotten into them, but there were no paw prints, no signs of disturbance other than the destruction itself. It didn't make sense. I spent the day trying to paint, but something felt off. The colors didn't look right. The lines felt shaky. Frustrated, I decided to take a break and explore more of the area. The old bridge drew me in again, its weathered planks creaking under my boots as I crossed it. The creek below was impossibly still, its surface like a mirror reflecting the gnarled trees overhead. On the far side of the bridge, I noticed something etched into one of the trees. A name and a date carved deep into the bark. Margaret, 1893. The letters were uneven, as if done in haste. But what caught my attention was the feeling that swept over me as I touched the carving. A sudden, overwhelming sadness that didn't feel like my own. That night, the humming returned. I was inside the RV, trying to sketch, when I heard it again, drifting through the stillness. It was louder this time. Unmistakable. The sound seemed to seep through the walls, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, my heart pounding. The air was icy, much colder than it had been earlier, and the forest was eerily quiet. The humming led me to the bridge, where the fog had thickened, shrouding the creek in an otherworldly glow. And then I saw her. She stood at the edge of the creek, her back to me. She wore a long dress, the kind you'd see in old photographs, and her hair cascaded down her back in dark waves. She was humming that same mournful tune, the sound weaving through the air like a spell. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. She stopped humming, but didn't turn around. I took a hesitant step closer, and as I did, she began to dissolve, her form breaking apart like mist until there was nothing left but the fog. I stood there, frozen, unsure if what I'd seen was real or some trick of the light and my overactive imagination. The next day, I decided to drive into town to clear my head. At a small gas station, I struck up a conversation with the attendant, an older man who seemed to know the area well. "You're camping by the bridge, aren't you?" he asked when I mentioned Paint Creek. "Yeah, why?" He hesitated, then said, "People say it's haunted. They call her the Lady of Paint Creek. Story goes, she was abandoned by her husband during a harsh winter. He promised to come back for her, but he never did. She waited by that bridge until she froze to death. Now she haunts the creek, looking for people to join her." I laughed nervously, but his expression remained serious. "I'd avoid that bridge if I were you," he added, "especially at night." That evening, I couldn't stay away. Something about the Lady of Paint Creek drew me in, like a moth to a flame. I set up my easel near the bridge, determined to capture her essence in my painting. As the hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, the fog rolled in again, and the humming returned. This time it was louder, more insistent. The air around me grew colder, and when I looked up, there she was, standing in the middle of the bridge. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her hollow eyes bore into mine. She didn't move, but the humming turned into words, a whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Stay with me." I backed away, but my foot slipped on the wet grass, and I fell. When I looked up, she was gone, but the feeling of her presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. I grabbed my supplies and ran back to the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I dreamed of her. In the dream, I was standing on the bridge, staring down at the icy water. She appeared beside me, her hand cold as she touched my arm. "He left me," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "They all leave." When I woke, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, just beyond the edges of my vision. I knew I had to do something to end this, to break her hold on me. On my final night at Paint Creek, I returned to the bridge with my sketchbook and paints. The fog was thicker than ever, and the cold seeped into my bones. I set up my supplies and began to paint, my hands trembling as I worked. I painted her story, the bridge, the creek, her lonely figure, waiting in the snow. As I finished, the humming surrounded me, and she appeared again. This time, closer. Her hollow eyes were filled with tears, and she reached out a hand toward the painting. I stepped back, unsure of what to do. "You're remembered now?" I said, my voice breaking. "You're not forgotten." She stared at the painting for what felt like an eternity, then dissolved into the mist. Her presence lifted, like a weight from my chest. The forest grew quiet again, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I left Paint Creek the next morning, the painting tucked safely in the RV. It's one of my best works, but I've never been able to sell it. Something about it feels sacred, like it belongs to her. Even now, I hear her humming in my dreams, but it's softer now, almost peaceful, as if she's finally found rest. And maybe in a way, so have I. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last, but something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call, or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael Desert, as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70, heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive. He needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister. Bones to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter, Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit working and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping. No, not tapping. Scratching. It was coming from the crate, a large wooden crate strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted just slightly, as though something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it. Not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B, no questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought. Some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static. Then, through the fuzz, I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days. That's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long, flowing dresses, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again, then came the knocking, loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open. And then everything stopped. The wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out, one voice I knew. Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder, and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I could see them again. The figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar. Faces I'd seen on the road before. Long-dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her. Carol, standing in the middle of the road, her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal. No way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again. Carol, walking slowly toward me. Her face pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting as the darkness closed in around me. I didn't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or anything supernatural. I spent most of my career chasing down so-called paranormal phenomena and explaining them with cold, hard facts. That was my job, turning superstition into science, myths into measurable data. The Brown Mountain Lights? They were just another mystery waiting for a rational explanation. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV up the winding roads of Pisgah National Forest. The thick trees closed in on either side. The air was crisp, and autumn leaves scattered across the path. There was a quiet stillness that made the world feel far away. I should have felt calm, excited even. But as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges, leaving the forest bathed in shadow, I felt something else. Tension. Shaking it off, I parked the RV at the remote campsite I'd scouted. This was supposed to be a solo trip, a few days to get up close and personal with the Brown Mountain lights, interview locals, take readings, and prove once and for all that the lights were nothing more than atmospheric conditions or optical illusions. I had all the gear I'd need: high-resolution cameras, thermal scanners, EMF detectors, the works. I wasn't expecting to find anything supernatural, just an anomaly. And anomalies had explanations. But the moment I stepped out of the RV, a chill ran through me. The trees rustled softly, as if whispering some secret I wasn't meant to hear. Focus, I muttered to myself, dragging my gear out and setting up the cameras, angling them toward Brown Mountain Ridge. I had a perfect view of the ridge from my campsite, miles away, but clear in the distance. That's where the lights were supposed to appear. By the time I was fully settled in, I was sitting outside the RV, bundled in a jacket, sipping coffee, and staring out into the dark, waiting. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. Then, around midnight, I saw them. At first, they were faint, flickering, small orbs of light hovering just above the ridge. I squinted, adjusting the focus on my binoculars. There they were. Three lights bobbing in the air like they were floating on an invisible current. I grabbed my camera, flipping the switch to start recording, but nothing happened. The lens stayed black. The screen dead. What the hell? I muttered, fiddling with the buttons. Fully charged and brand new, the camera shouldn't have malfunctioned. I checked the battery, clicked it back into place, and tried again. Still nothing. Frustration surged through me. This was exactly what I'd come here for. The lights, right there in front of me, and I couldn't even capture them. I stood up, grabbing my thermal scanner, but when I flipped it on, the screen flickered, then went dark. "Come on," I whispered, trying to stay calm. The gear wasn't cheap, and none of it should have been failing, but it was, piece by piece. The lights danced on the ridge, growing brighter, closer. My heart raced. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I was just annoyed. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it. Maybe the electronics were glitching because of interference. Some kind of electromagnetic field or something. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. But the lights, those strange pulsing orbs, kept moving, almost as if they were drifting toward me. The air turned cold, so cold that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. A thin layer of frost started forming on the ground, on the RV windows, on my gear. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands beginning to stiffen in the chill. It didn't make sense. The weather forecast had called for a cool night, but nothing like this. I checked my phone's temperature app. 30 degrees-y? Impossible. I glanced at my surroundings, feeling the silence close in around me. Then I noticed the lights were no longer on the ridge. They were much closer now, floating just above the treetops, flickering like distant fireflies, but larger. Too large. I watched, heart pounding, as they bobbed and weaved. Their glow cast long shadows on the ground. I pulled out my phone to take a video. The screen flashed, then went black. It wouldn't turn on. Frustration boiled over. I slammed the phone down on the camping table. It bounced. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. This was why people got sucked into believing nonsense, because technology failed at the worst possible moment. The lights weren't supernatural. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cold was messing with the equipment, or some kind of atmospheric distortion. But then I saw the handprints. Small, faint handprints etched in frost on the RV window. They hadn't been there before. I knew that. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They looked like the handprints of a child, no more than a few inches across. And they were slowly, gradually melting away in the cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I turned to look at the lights, now hovering at the edge of the forest. Close enough that I could make out their eerie bluish glow. They flickered in the trees, moving in slow, lazy circles, as if they were watching me, waiting for me. The rational part of my mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no way the lights could have traveled that fast. No way they could be this close. I'd seen videos, read reports. They were always distant, spectral, unreachable. But now they felt personal, as if they were beckoning me. I swallowed, my throat tight. Without thinking, I took a step forward. The cold deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. The frost crept up the sides of the RV, spreading like delicate veins. The temperature continued to drop. My breath came out in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred. The lights drifted deeper into the trees, flickering and glowing, moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, like they wanted me to follow. And I did. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I made my way toward the forest's edge. The beam of light was weak, barely cutting through the dark. I kept my eyes on the lights, feeling a strange pull in my chest, like something was urging me forward. As I entered the trees, the world grew darker. The lights danced just out of reach, always a few steps ahead of me, their glow casting an ethereal light on the twisted branches. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't even noticed. My legs ached, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea how far I'd wandered. The lights flickered again, brightening as they circled a large boulder ahead, and then they stopped, hovering there, motionless. I took a step closer, and that's when the hallucinations began. Shapes, faint figures moving in the trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long. And there, between the branches, I saw faces. Pale, expressionless faces staring at me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. Panic set in. I turned to leave, but the forest had shifted. The path I'd taken was no longer clear. Everything looked the same trees, the same twisting branches. The lights pulsed behind me, glowing brighter as if taunting me. I ran. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My heart raced in my chest as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to find my way back to the campsite. The lights flickered at the corners of my vision, but I ignored them. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick footsteps crunching through the frost behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, my flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, and saw the RV ahead. A welcome sight. But the air around it was colder than ever. The frost was so thick on the windows that it looked like snow. And there, pressed against the glass, were more handprints, dozens of them. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor, panting. My entire body trembled with cold and fear. The lights were still out there. I could see them through the frosted windows, flickering in the trees, growing fainter as the night wore on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, they were gone. The temperature returned to normal and the frost melted away, but I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I packed up the RV and drove out of Pisgah National Forest, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I'd come here to find an explanation, to debunk the Brown Mountain lights. But what I found was something else, something I couldn't explain. And I knew, deep down, that the lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were something more. Something ancient. Something dangerous. Something that had almost taken me. I don't know what they wanted, but I'll never go back to find out. It had been 4 months since the divorce was finalized, and I was still trying to wrap my head around it. The life I had imagined, the woman I thought I would grow old with, it was all gone. That's why I decided to take the RV out to Mount Hood National Forest for a long weekend. I needed to get away from everything. No people, no reminders, just me and nature. My therapist said it would be good for me to clear my head and reconnect with something that didn't remind me of failure. Honestly, I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try something. If I stayed home, I would have just drowned myself in the silence of my empty apartment. This trip, I told myself, would be different. I could handle the quiet out here. I arrived in the late afternoon, pulling the RV into a spot near Timothy Lake. It was a beautiful area. Tall Douglas firs surrounded the lake like silent sentinels, the water reflecting the sky like a mirror. There were no other campers nearby, which was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. I parked, shut off the engine, and took a deep breath. The air was cool, crisp, with that faint scent of pine needles. Perfect. For a moment, I thought I could finally breathe again. After setting up a small campfire, I sat back in my foldable chair, staring at the fading light over the mountains. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Peace. That's what I needed. But as the sun dipped lower, the quiet became overwhelming. There was no wind now, no rustling, no animal sounds. Just me, sitting in a bubble of silence. I checked my watch. It was just after 6 p.m. That's when I noticed it. It was too quiet. The forest around me, which should have been alive with the sounds of birds and insects, was dead silent. At first, I figured it was just a lull, but as the minutes dragged on, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears, the soft crunch of every movement I made in my chair. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Maybe this was what true isolation felt like. No noise, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement between the trees. It was subtle, a shadow slipping between the trunks, just far enough away that I couldn't get a good look. I froze, squinting into the woods. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that played tricks on my mind. I scanned the tree line, waiting for the shadow to return, but saw nothing. The trees stood still, their branches unmoving in the dead air. Must be a deer, I muttered, forcing myself to relax. The wind picked up briefly, rustling the leaves. I sighed, relieved to hear some kind of noise again. I grabbed a few more logs and threw them onto the fire. The crackling wood was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. I told myself I was just on edge from being out here, alone, with too much time to think. After eating a quick meal, I decided to call it an early night. The silence was getting under my skin, so I climbed into the RV, locked the door behind me, and settled into the small bed in the back. My phone had no signal, of course, but I wasn't planning on talking to anyone anyway. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to let my mind go blank, but the silence didn't let me rest. The RV was soundproofed, but even then I felt like something was missing. No crickets, no owls, nothing, just the absence of sound. I felt trapped inside my own head. Every little shift of the mattress or rustle of my blanket amplified in the quiet. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. I wasn't sure why at first. There hadn't been any loud noises or nightmares, just silence. But something was wrong. My skin prickled with unease. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and glanced around the RV. The windows were fogged up, and the air felt heavier, somehow oppressive. I heard something outside. No, that wasn't right. I heard nothing outside. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, listening closely. It was the strangest sensation, like my own breathing was distant, muffled, as though I wasn't entirely in my own body. I moved toward the window and wiped away some of the condensation with my sleeve, peering into the blackness beyond the RV. For a long time, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows, and then movement. This time, I was sure. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the moonlight. Tall, unnaturally still, like it was waiting for something. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to see more clearly. It didn't move, just stood there watching. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't respond. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, my mind racing. Was it another camper? Some kind of ranger? No, there was no way anyone would be out here this late without a sound. I checked the door. It was still locked. Good. But I felt exposed, vulnerable, knowing that whatever was out there was watching me. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it out the window, sweeping the beam across the clearing. The figure was gone. Just like that. Vanished. As if it had never been there. The next morning, the forest was still eerily quiet. No birds, no animals, just the constant oppressive silence. I tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but it clung to me like a wet blanket. I told myself I was just paranoid, that the solitude was messing with my head, but something about the way the air felt today, something was off. I decided to take a short hike to clear my mind, hoping that getting out of the RV would make me feel better. But as I ventured down the trail, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something behind me, but the trail was empty. That's when I saw it again, a figure, this time in the distance, standing between the trees just off the trail. It was the same one from last night, tall, gaunt, and still. My heart hammered in my chest as I squinted, trying to make out more details. But before I could move, it slipped behind the trees and disappeared. I ran toward the spot where I'd seen it, my boots pounding against the damp earth. When I reached the trees, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show that anyone had been there at all. I stood there, catching my breath, feeling the silence pressing down on me like a vice. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest around me was completely still. Even my footsteps had stopped making noise. I stopped my boot on the ground, but I heard nothing, not even the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. Panic surged through me. I clapped my hands together. Nothing. No sound. My breathing was shallow, frantic, but it was like I was listening to it from far away. The world had gone completely, impossibly silent. And then I saw them. Not just one figure, but several, moving between the trees. Their bodies blended with the shadows. They were everywhere, circling me in complete silence. My heart raced, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. My legs felt heavy, every step muted, like I was running underwater. The forest shifted around me, the trail disappearing into the thick fog that had rolled in, disorienting me further. Somehow I made it back to the RV. I slammed the door shut, locking it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but still no sound. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was useless. The screen flickered, the GPS spinning in circles. I was trapped. For the next few hours, I stayed inside the RV, pacing back and forth, trying to calm myself down, but the silence never lifted. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts anymore. Just the crushing weight of nothingness. And then, as the light began to fade, I saw them again, the silent ones. They were standing in a circle around the RV, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. There were no features, no mouths, just smooth skin where their faces should have been. They stood perfectly still, watching me through the windows, their bodies unnervingly thin and elongated. I banged on the window, screaming, but of course, no sound came. They didn't flinch, didn't move. They just stared, waiting. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave, but the RV wouldn't start. Every time I tried, the engine sputtered and died, as if something was draining the life out of it. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping outside. The silent ones didn't move, didn't react. But as I walked toward them, the air grew colder, the silence even more oppressive. My footsteps made no sound. My breathing was barely there. I felt a hand on my shoulder and spun around, expecting to see one of them behind me. But there was nothing, just the fog swirling around me and the figures waiting in the distance. In that moment, I realized what they wanted. They weren't going to kill me. No, that would be too simple. They wanted me to join them, to become one of them. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a part of them, and it was seeping into me, stealing my voice, my thoughts, my very sense of self. And if I stayed here much longer, I knew I would lose everything. I don't remember how I made it out. The next thing I knew, I was driving far away from the campsite, from the silent ones. The sound of the engine, the tires on the road, it was all faint, like I was still caught in their grip. But at least there was something, a reminder that I hadn't completely disappeared into that silence. It's been weeks since I got back, but I can still feel it. The quiet follows me, lingers in the corners of my apartment. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I can feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. And I know that one day, they'll come for me again. This time, I won't be able to run. My name is Jacob Johnson, and this happened back in 1996 out near the ragged coastline of Maine. I had this idea of finding some peace, so I borrowed my uncle's RV for the summer, thinking I'd get some fresh air, recharge from life. I figured I'd get in some solo time, a few fishing trips, some quiet nights. That's how I ended up at a park near Black Harbor, a little nowhere town that didn't even get cell reception back then. This wasn't a famous national park or even one of those scenic overlooks that people make pilgrimages to. It was just woods, rough and thick, fading into a rocky coastline that nobody seemed to care about. I was a few days into my quiet escape, living off canned beans on a half-empty propane stove that hissed with a little too much attitude for my taste. The most exciting part of my day was waiting for the rain to pass so I could take out my fishing rod. I didn't expect much more than sea salt air and seagulls. It was halfway through my fourth day, sometime in the late afternoon, that I heard what I figured must be kids from the local town messing around. The voices were faint, echoing through the woods in some distant way that made it hard to place them. I thought about walking down to see what was going on, maybe throwing a rock or two to scare them off if they got too close, but I didn't think much of it. By evening, though, something had shifted. I heard footsteps, not the quick, careless crunch of sneakers, but deliberate, slow steps. I was in the RV, scratching down a grocery list of things I'd need on my next trip back to town when I caught the sound. It was steady, creeping up around the corner of the RV. It hit me that I hadn't seen another soul out here since I'd arrived, and that didn't sit right. I mean, who comes out to this kind of place aside from someone with a taste for quiet or trouble? I kept still, waiting for the person to pass or show themselves, but there was only the slow, shuffling drag of footsteps. I tried to listen for the sound of multiple feet or voices, but it was dead silent except for that single shuffle. Against my better judgment, I opened the RV door and stepped outside. Nothing, just trees swaying in the evening light. But my instinct told me to keep quiet. I could still feel something out there, hiding, the kind of presence that prickles the hair on your neck and makes you regret stepping out of safety. I stayed there, scanning the tree line, listening. I almost thought I'd imagined it until I spotted something strange, half hidden between the trees, a figure, still as stone, facing away from me. The guy looked like he was part of the forest itself, cloaked in grime, with torn, mud-stained clothes hanging off him like a loose second skin. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Just stood there, as if rooted to the ground. Now, I don't scare easy, but something about this man felt like a bad omen. I cleared my throat, thinking maybe he was some lost hiker or drifter, but he didn't flinch, didn't even look at me. Finally, I called out something casual, like asking if he needed directions. Still nothing. After a long moment, he turned, slow, like he was trying to remember how to move. His face was something I'll never forget, but not because it was scary exactly. It was hollow, if that makes any sense. This blank expression, like he'd forgotten what it meant to be human. He took a step forward, just one, like he was testing the ground. I backed up so fast I almost tripped. I tried to laugh it off, told myself he was just some messed up camper, but the way he looked at me, it was like he wasn't looking at me at all, just through me. I ducked back into the RV, my heart racing, and locked the door. It felt stupid, locking up, but something about him felt off, like he wasn't just some regular guy lost in the woods. I figured he'd wander off, but minutes later, I heard him shuffling again, this time closer to the RV. I looked out the window and saw him standing right there, not more than 10 feet away. His face twisted into this deadpan stare that sent a chill down my spine. Then came the whispering. Low, muttering sounds, barely audible, like he was talking to someone only he could hear. At first, I thought he was addressing me, but then I realized he wasn't looking at the RV at all. His head tilted, and he mumbled something about payment and lost souls. The words were scattered, fragmented, like someone trying to piece together a broken sentence. I sat there watching him, my heart pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it, but he just kept muttering, almost in a trance. At that point, I was just about ready to pack it up and find somewhere else to park. I reached for my bag, ready to throw some stuff together, when the RV suddenly rocked. I heard metal groaning, and something slammed into the side with a force that shook the whole rig. I was paralyzed for a second, gripping the edge of the table as the guy outside went silent. All I could hear was his breathing, loud and ragged against the thin walls of the RV. I heard a scratching sound, nails or something, scraping along the side, followed by a soft thud, as if he was testing the edges, feeling out the RV like it was some sort of animal he was trying to corner. I kept still, my back pressed against the wall, listening to every sound. I'd never felt fear like that. This primal kind of terror that kicks in when you realize you're trapped. The scratching stopped, and in the silence that followed, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps receding. I took a breath, thinking maybe he'd finally left, but then I smelled something foul. It was a metallic, rotten scent that crept through the vents, filling the air inside with a stench so bad it turned my stomach. I gagged, covering my nose, and nearly bolted for the door. Before I could, I heard him speak again. His voice was low and guttural this time. He muttered louder, "Must be paid." I froze, not sure if he was talking to himself or if he was giving some kind of twisted warning. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I grabbed my bag and edged toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. I took a quick look through the window and saw him walking away, his figure disappearing into the trees. I bolted, taking off through the woods in the opposite direction. The sound of his footsteps echoed somewhere behind me, and for a moment, I thought I could hear him muttering again. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I'd cleared the tree line and hit the gravel road. My feet ached, and my lungs burned, but I didn't care. I just kept running, putting as much distance as I could between me and that place. Hours later, I found a small gas station by the highway and told the cashier everything. He gave me this look, like he'd heard it before, then mumbled something about an old man who'd gone crazy years ago, back when the town was still booming. He said the guy used to wander the woods, talking to himself about debts and payments, claiming to be some sort of collector. Local legend had it that he went mad after his family drowned in a storm. The story was that he'd gone feral, taking to the woods, driven by some twisted sense of revenge or justice. I don't know if I believe in all that. All I know is that I saw him, heard him, and every time I think of that muttering, "Debt must be paid," I feel a chill that doesn't fade. I don't know who he thought I was or what debt he imagined I owed, but I'll tell you one thing. I'm never setting foot near Black Harbor again. Some debts you just don't pay. When I left the city, I was desperate for peace. After a messy divorce and years spent staring at screens, I wanted silence. Real silence. Not the muffled hum of traffic or the constant buzz of electronics, but the quiet only nature could offer. That's how I ended up in Mohan State Park, alone in my old RV, parked on the edge of the Clear Fork Gorge. The park was stunning, especially in the late afternoon light. Trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their leaves a tapestry of green and gold. The air smelled clean, untouched by asphalt or fumes. It was perfect, at least at first. The first day was uneventful. I hiked the main trails, snapping a few photos with my phone, and spent the evening cooking a simple meal on my RV's small stove. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a rare kind of contentment. This was what I needed. No emails, no ex-wife, no one telling me what to do or who to be. Just me in the woods. But by the second day, things began to feel off. It started when I noticed the trail. I had been walking back to my RV after a long hike when I spotted it, a faint path branching off the main one, almost hidden by overgrown bushes. It was narrow, barely more than a line of packed dirt, and it twisted sharply into the woods. Something about it tugged at me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I was just tired of the predictability of the main trails. Whatever it was, I stepped off the beaten path and onto the faint trail. The air felt different as I walked, heavier, quieter. The usual sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling, seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. After a few minutes, I found the ruins. At first, I thought it was just a pile of rocks, but as I got closer, I saw the remains of a chimney and the rotting beams of what must have been a small cabin. A rusted metal lantern sat in the dirt, its handle broken. The ground was littered with shards of pottery and what looked like animal bones. A shiver crawled up my spine. Someone lived out here, I muttered to myself. The idea seemed impossible. This part of the park was miles from any road, and the trail was nearly invisible. Why would anyone build a cabin here? I snapped a photo and turned back toward the RV, eager to put the strange scene behind me. That night, the noises started. I had just crawled into bed when I heard it, a faint snapping sound, like someone stepping on a twig. I froze, my heart pounding. Raccoons, I told myself. Or maybe deer. I wasn't exactly deep in the wilderness, so wildlife was normal. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to belong to an animal. They circled the RV, crunching the dry leaves and stopping occasionally, as if whoever or whatever was out there was listening. I grabbed my flashlight and swung open the door, shining the beam into the trees. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Is someone out there?" The forest stared back at me, silent and empty. After a few minutes, I retreated inside, locking the door and double-checking the windows. Eventually, the footsteps faded, and I convinced myself it was just a hiker passing through. Nothing to worry about. The next morning, I stopped by the visitor center to report the strange noises. Leah, the park guide on duty, greeted me with a friendly smile, but it faltered when I described what I'd heard. "You were near the old trapper's cabin, weren't you?" she asked, her voice low. I blinked. "Trapper's cabin?" she nodded. "It's an old story. Back in the early 1900s, a man built a cabin deep in the woods, far from anyone else. They say he was reclusive, didn't trust people. One day, he just vanished. No one knows what happened, but some locals think his ghost still wanders the forest." I couldn't help but laugh. "Ghosts? Come on." Leah shrugged. "Believe what you want, but I'd stay away from that area if I were you. People say the forest gets strange near the cabin." I left the visitor center feeling annoyed. Ghost stories were fine for campfire entertainment, but I wasn't about to let a local legend ruin my weekend. That night, the disturbances grew worse. I was halfway through dinner when the lights in the RV flickered and went out. I swore under my breath, grabbing a flashlight to check the breaker. As I fumbled with the panel, I heard the footsteps again. Closer this time, circling the RV like a predator sizing up its prey. The flashlight beam caught something on the ground. Footprints. Human footprints. Large and deep, as if whoever made them was heavy. My breath caught in my throat. "Okay," I muttered, trying to steady myself. "Someone's messing with me." Grabbing my hiking boots, I stepped outside, determined to confront whoever was out there. But the second I stepped into the clearing, the forest fell silent. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness that pressed against my ears. That's when I saw the first figure. It was pale and thin, barely more than a shadow against the trees. It stood perfectly still, its face obscured by darkness. Then it moved, not toward me, but away, disappearing into the woods without a sound. I didn't follow. Instead, I locked myself in the RV, sat by the window gripping a kitchen knife, and watched the forest until dawn. By the time the sun rose, I'd made up my mind. I had to go back to the cabin. I needed answers. The trail felt even more oppressive in the daylight. The air was thick, and the silence was absolute. When I reached the clearing, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small, rusted knife lying in the dirt. Next to it was a notebook, its cover warped with age. I picked it up carefully, flipping through the yellowed pages. Most of the writing was illegible, but a few sentences stood out, scrawled in jagged letters. "It watches from the trees. Don't disturb the woods. The forest is alive." A chill ran down my spine. As I turned to leave, the ground beneath me seemed to shift, the dirt rippling like water. The trees creaked, their branches twisting unnaturally. And then I felt it. A presence. Something unseen, massive, and ancient, watching me from every direction. I ran. The RV was my only sanctuary, but even there I wasn't safe. The lights flickered. The floor trembled. The air grew thick with the stench of damp earth. Through the window, I saw the pale figure again, joined by others, shadows slipping between the trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The ground beneath the RV began to groan, roots writhing like snakes. I turned the key in the ignition, praying the engine would start. It roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas. As the RV lurched forward, the figures began to move, their blank faces turning toward me. The roots clawed at the tires, but the momentum was enough to break free. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest shrinking in my rearview mirror. I never went back to Mohan State Park. Whatever was in those woods, it didn't want me there. And I was more than happy to stay away. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of the forest. I hear footsteps outside my window, and I swear I can feel its eyes on me. The forest doesn't forget, and neither do I.